morning, good morning. How are we? Oh, you need to be a little bit louder. It's a conference and you're here on a Saturday. Thank you for your time. We're going to kick off. You should have the schedule on your tables, but we're running a little bit late, so I will just moderate through the day if you have any questions. So good morning, everyone. Lovely to see you all. And we have some people on Zoom, so hello to the people online as well. This is our first face-to-face, so I'm really excited that you could all make it this morning. Big clap for yourself. All right. To begin today, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Ora Nation, traditional custodians on the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Island peoples here today. So my name is Maria. Find me throughout the day. I'm your MC for the day. I am a member of ASCA Victoria. I'm on the committee. And I'm very proud to have this face-to-face and virtual conference. The first one last year was virtually, and it was really exciting to see over 100 people attend. And today to have you all in the room and the people online is really exciting for us. So some housekeeping, just real quickly. In case of an emergency, we go out that door, follow the green man who's running on top of the doors. The bathrooms are, if you go out to your left, that's where you'll find the bathrooms. There's water, we'll have breaks, we have food. So please keep hydrated and make sure you talk to somebody who you haven't met before as the day goes by. Okay, so let's kick things off. I'd like to welcome Agnes Nsofwa, the Executive Director and co-founder of ASCA, to the stage to give us her welcoming remarks.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm excited. I don't know how I'm feeling. Anxious, happy, everything today. But I'm very honored and humbled to welcome you to our second Sickle Cell Conference, as Maria said, today, the 10th of September. As Maria said, I'm Agnes. I'm a mom to 4 beautiful humans and a fairy dog called Koda. I'm a registered nurse, a published author, and an advocacy consultant. Let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land we work on today. I want to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Islanders people attending here today. To the Honourable Minister, Honourable Mark Butler in absentia, Honourable Maria Vamvakinou, who also see this in absentia, our Chairperson Ngaire Elwood, who's attending a conference as we speak, but she will attend later on today. She's also in absentia at the moment. Our ASCA board members, ASCA executive members, ASCA ordinary members, invited health professionals, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Today marks a very important milestone for our organization as we host the first ever face-to-face Sickle Cell Conference in Australia. Almost 4 years ago, ASCA was born in our living room, and one of our objectives was to mandate ourselves to continue changing the face of sickle cell disease in this country. And one such way was to hold annual sickle cell conferences. I'm happy that we have achieved that, and that we are here in our second year of bringing the different stakeholders of sickle cell in the same room, holding this special day. I would like to first and foremost thank the New South Wales Department through the Office of Honourable Brad Hazard MP, who's made it very possible for us to have this conference. Novartis, also our sponsor, and all our supporting other organizations, as you can see from the different banners. Without them, this conference wasn't going to be possible. Let me also thank each and every one of you here, especially the health professionals, Dr. Greenwood, Dr. Kylie, and all the other professionals here. Thank you so much for coming. Our theme for this year is Health Equity for All, the importance of newborn screening in health management. We deliberately picked this theme, bearing in mind that even the unborn children who may have sickle cell disease in future deserve care or a better life. In November 2020, our organization applied for the inclusion of newborn screening program for sickle cell disease to be added to the Australian newborn screening program. As we speak, we are delighted that just last week, we have proceeded to the next stage, and that the program is now under the Health Technology Assessment through the Medical Services Advisory Committee. So this is a step closer for us to get that program in this country. So the next step for us is to wait if it's recommended by the federal government and later on by the state government, and that's what we are hoping for. However, we are still a few steps away from getting the recommendation, because as we know, once that's done, we still have to lobby, and by doing this is one way of lobbying to see that the newborn screening is actually part of the program in this country. So newborn screening implementation is something that's very personal to me, very close to my heart. I know that my daughter, who was born 14 years ago, had we had the newborn screening then, she wasn't going to have some of the complications that she endured, including cutting part of her lung as we speak today. So if we do this, then we're doing better for the next generation and the children to come. I'm excited that we have Honorable Mark Butler, who's going to join us by video to participate in this conference, as I know that even as he's not here in person, he will be briefed about the contents of this conference. Honorable Butler recognized the need of having some of the things like the inclusion of the hemoglobinopathy registry for sickle cell disease in last year's conference, and it's our hope that his office will do everything possible to ensure that the work of the Monash University hemoglobinopathy registry get all the help they can, as having that registry will be able to change the lives of the sickle cell patients in this country in terms of access to medication and access to other novel therapies that we don't have in this country. As we know, the numbers for anything in health are required, and we are hoping that he's going to honor the promise that he did at last year's conference, and we are yet to follow that up. I would also like to acknowledge that Honorable Maria Vamvakinou, who is also going to join us by video today. We are doing everything possible to ensure that we can recognize the World Sickle Cell Day and World Sickle Cell Month in this country as we work with her as well. As we deliberate today until 6 p.m., and we are sorry that we're so excited, Maya said, next year we'll do something better, but we would like to thank all the speakers participating in this conference today. Special thanks to our keynote speakers, Dr Ifeyinwa Osunkwo, who's going to join us from Nigeria as I speak. She's in America, but she's actually in Nigeria as we speak. Dr Anthe Greenway, she's also one of our keynote speakers. Dr Kongolo Kalumba, who's also going to join us by video. And Dr Kylie Mason, who's also one of the keynote speakers. I'd also like to give a special thank you to all our US speakers, Dr. Gregory Kecho, who's going to join us by virtual as well, Dr. Patrick McGann, and Dr. Akshat Jain, who are taking their valuable time on a Friday evening at the US Standard Time, especially Dr. Keto is going to present at 1 a.m. Eastern Standard. So with that, I just want to thank each and every one of you and all the stakeholders that have made this possible, that we've been doing for the past 4 years. I'm humbled. There's nothing more I can say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Agnes. Thank you for all your tireless work. We will now listen to a recording from Dr. Elwood, who is the ASCA board chairman. She can't be with us today. She is in Miami for the Blood Conference, but she is with us in spirit and will play her welcome remarks.
Hello and welcome to the second Australian Sickle Cell Scientific Conference. My name is Associate Professor Ngaire Elwood. I'm the chair of the ASCA Advisory Board and have had the privilege of getting to know Agnes and the team at ASCA over the past year and to participate in and learn more about the work that ASCA is doing within Australia, but also their work in linking to the global networks of those researching, treating and advocating for patients and families with sickle cell disease. I'm the director of the BMDI Cord Blood Bank at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, which plays an important role in providing stem cell product for patients requiring a bone marrow transplant. I'm really sorry I'm not able to attend the ASCA conference in person today. I'm coming to you from Miami in the United States, where I am here attending and presenting at the International Cord Blood Connect conference and learning all about new developments in the field of cord blood and bone marrow transplantation, including its use in the treatment of sickle cell disease. I'm equally excited about the program that the ASCA conference organising team are able to bring to you today, and grateful to the many expert speakers who have kindly agreed to present at the conference, sharing their knowledge and providing a state-of-the-art perspective of the field of sickle cell disease. We are grateful for the interest and support of ASCA and this meeting, from the Minister for Health and Ageing, Mark Butler MP, and also the Honourable Maria Vamvakinou. We thank the clinicians and scientists who are also presenting, but also those who have agreed to share their stories about the impact of sickle cell disease and why we, as an organisation, need to keep undertaking research, providing education, and speaking to government and health organisations as to what Australian patients and families and the broader community need in terms of sickle cell disease. This is particularly relevant for the newborn screening program that ASCA have been lobbying to government for some time now, and which is now being progressed via due process through the relevant government department. We are grateful to government for listening and considering the support of this vital initiative. We also urgently need a formal hemoglobinopathy registry in Australia. The submission to government for the development of a newborn screening program would have been really helped if we knew more about the figures of those in Australia who are diagnosed and receiving treatment for sickle cell disease. So this is another area that ASCA is actively working on. I know you will be enriched, inspired, and informed by all that you hear and learn today. I encourage you to speak up, ask questions, share your experience during the informal interactive program that is planned. Enormous thanks to Agnes and the ASCA conference planning team for all your work to prepare for today. I wish you all the best and hope you have a truly enjoyable day.
Great, thank you. Thank you to Dr. Elwood for her message. We're now going to have a testimony on Zoom. So Hanna is our ASCA ambassador, our child ambassador, and she couldn't make it here today, but she is on Zoom. So we'll give Hanna a chance to give us a quick welcome. Hi, Hanna. Nice to see you this morning. Can Hanna hear us? You might be on mute, Hanna. No. Or is it our end? Just imagine some hold music playing while we're sorting out the technical issues.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, excellent. Good morning, Hanna. All right. So we'll hear a testimony from Hanna.
Which part of sickle cell I think would be feeling different? Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, that's better.
I often feel different at school because I wear a mask to protect myself and my family from COVID. I stay inside the multi-purpose room to prevent sickle crises. And that causes a lot of problems because there are people who will either fight about coming inside with me or they won't want to come inside and then I'll be alone. I sit on a chair to prevent leg pain in class, and I often miss school days or leave in the middle of the day for appointments. And I'm not a sporty person, but it seems like everyone in my class is, so I often feel left out. And although I have told my whole school about my condition, I know I'll always have to explain things and advocate for myself and others. So when I discovered ASCA, it changed my life because finding all of these wonderful people with shared experiences helped me to feel less alone. In just a short time, I've attended many interviews, conferences, meetings, and have even written a chapter in The Many Faces and Lives of Sickle Cell, a global collaboration. Advocating for sickle cell is a huge privilege, but it can sometimes be difficult with hospital appointments, sickle crises, and feeling unwell. But I want to thank Agnes for this opportunity to advocate in front of everybody and to raise awareness for not only myself, but for everybody with sickle cell. So thank you. Oh, and I also want to say that I think newborn screening is really important because it was just a chance that my mum got tested, that I got tested for sickle cell before I was even born, when my mum was pregnant. And not everybody has that privilege to be tested. And then they have to struggle for most of their lives before they find out, okay, it's sickle cell, which is why newborn screening could really help with that whole scenario.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. Hanna. We're really proud of all the presentations. She's been, doing talks at her school. Really proud of your advocacy at a young age. So thank you. It's a great honor for us to have the support of the Federal Health Minister, Honorable Mark Butler MP. He could not be here with us, but he has recorded a message which we will now listen to.
Well, good morning, everyone. Unfortunately, I can't be with you in person today, but I wanted again to provide a message to this important conference.
Hi, greetings again.
Well, good morning, everyone. Unfortunately, I can't be with you in person today, but I wanted again to provide a message to this important conference. I'm recording this on the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I'll start by paying my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I also want to acknowledge Australian Sickle Cell Advocacy, your chair, Dr Ngaire Elwood, and your executive director, Agnes Nsofwa, for your outstanding commitment over the past 4 years. You've raised awareness of this disease at all levels, in the community, in the health and research professions, and here in government. Because while it is still reasonably rare in Australia, this disease is increasingly prevalent as our multicultural society continues to grow. We know how important early diagnosis and intervention in those early moments of life can make a huge difference for a number of rare diseases. One issue you've strongly advocated for is health equity, making screening for sickle cell disease available for all newborn babies. Everyone wants their child to have the best chance in life. A small percentage of babies will have a rare condition that can have severe or even fatal outcomes. Australia once led the world with our Australian newborn blood spot screening programs. In recent times, though, these programs haven't delivered consistently for all Australians. We know there are differences between different jurisdictions on what screening tests are available. And this is an area that we're really focused on. We want screening to be available to all Australian babies for the same conditions, no matter where they live. I want all babies across our country to receive a diagnosis in those crucial first moments of life, when it matters most and when we can have the biggest impact. The Australian Government will put an end to this disparity by ensuring that all newborns get all of the recommended screening tests, no matter where they are born. This is an election commitment that we're already implementing. We've announced more than $38 million over 4 years to help deliver more consistent and equitable newborn screening programs. I know this won't be a simple process and it won't happen overnight. I've raised this already with the states and territories, and my department is already working on it. I know ASCA has been invited to take part in this process, and I'm sure that your input will be invaluable. Consultation has commenced, including with culturally and linguistically diverse groups and First Nations people. Details for further consultation will be available shortly. And today we're focusing on sickle cell disease. ASCA applied to have the test for sickle cell included in the NBS in late 2020, and I can advise that a rapid evidence review has been completed. The application is now undergoing a health technology assessment, and the Medical Services Advisory Committee will provide advice in the middle of next year. I know it can never be soon enough, but this is progressing. With any screening program, the evidence has to be carefully considered. And it's not just about the lab tests. It's important to ensure the follow-up is there in terms of diagnosis, communication with families, counselling, and a positive medical pathway for the child and the family. It means access to specialty services like paediatric haematology, immunology, physiotherapy, cardiography, social services, and many, many others. I'm really keen to work with you, the rare disease sector, the medical profession, and with state and territory governments to once again have a world-leading newborn blood spot screening program here in Australia. Most importantly, to make sure that no family misses out on the medical technology which could give their babies the very best chance in life. Thank you, and I wish you all the very best for your conference.
Great, thank you, Honourable Mark Butler. We also have our ASCA Ambassador, who could not be with us today, so she's sent through her welcome remarks. And this is Honourable Maria Vamvakinou MP. So we'll just listen to her welcome remarks.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to join you today on what is the second Australian Sickle Cell Scientific Conference in Sydney. I'm very pleased to be able to join you online in what is shaping up to be a very important conference, which includes a large number of advocates and stakeholders in the area of sickle cell advocacy, from policymakers to health professionals to private sector representatives, academics, research institutions, NGOs, donors, developmental partners, community groups, patient groups, youth groups, and of course people living with sickle cell disease and other interested individuals. This is a wide range of stakeholders which attests to the importance of the work that has been conducted so far in the sickle cell advocacy, and I want to especially thank ASCA, because it was some years ago when I was approached by Agnes Nsofwa to be the patron of sickle cell disease advocacy. I remember well launching the group at the Royal Children's Hospital, and I'm very, very proud that we have come, I can say that we have come a very long way since those early beginnings of this very important advocacy group. Obviously, raising awareness about sickle cell in the community, and awareness raising for policymakers and also the medical profession has been critical in the work that is being done. Raising awareness leads to a need, identifying needs for further research, medical research in particular, for how we can best address preventative measures, and then possibly measures for treatment of people with sickle cell, and also hopefully into the future a cure for sickle cell disease. But at this stage, it is absolutely critical. The awareness levels have been raised immensely, not only in Australia but also globally. Agnes has done an amazing job networking globally with others and joining others in this global advocacy, because that's what this has now become. From my perspective as a Member of Parliament, there were a couple of aims and objectives that I have sought to assist with. One has been and continues to be the recognition of World Sickle Cell Day, which is on 19th of June, the recognition of that in the Australian Parliament, and that is something that we will continue to pursue until we are able to get to a stage where we do make World Sickle, June 19th, the day when Parliament recognises here in Australia World Sickle Cell Day. The other very important part of our advocacy over the years has been to work towards the full inclusion of sickle cell disease in newborn blood spot screening, and to put that on the NBS program, and with a funding and implementation in states and territories across Australia, so that all Australians, wherever they may be, will have access to this blood spot screening. I'm proud to say that our government, and Albanese Labor government, will deliver on this commitment, and we will work towards making Australia's newborn screening program world class. Australia has had the good fortune to lead the way in lots of scientific and medical research, so we're all very proud that our aim is to be world class in this newborn screening program. We know how important the newborn screening program is. It enables families to identify the possibility of sickle cell disease in babies, and I know from the stories and the testaments that I've heard over the years from families just how difficult it is for them when they know that their children are not well and tend to not be well for many years until finally they are diagnosed, how difficult those pre-diagnosis years are for the family and for the people involved. So a lot of work needs to be done still, but all I can say is that the advocacy for sickle cell disease in Australia and globally is in very good hands, in very competent hands, and Australian sickle cell advocacy leads that fight and for raising awareness. It leads the fight for ensuring that government and policymakers are aware of the need to invest in research, and it certainly, in doing so, provides our very large community here in Australia and internationally who have family with sickle cell disease. It provides for them opportunities to live with the condition and to improve the quality of lives of people with sickle cell disease. So I congratulate you all on and wish you all the very best on what I believe will be a very successful conference, but it will also be a conference that will bring to the fore for discussion more important research, and it will inform government and it will inform community, and to that end I'm absolutely looking forward to the conference's resolutions and what is learned from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Maria. We're very proud of the support that she constantly gives us. I will now hand over to Professor Crosley.
Thank you very much, Mayasi. So my task is to introduce our first speaker. Before I do, if I just explain myself, my name is Professor Merlin Crossley. I work at the University of New South Wales. I've worked on sickle cell disease in the lab for 30 years, but in a sense of basic science. understanding the genetics, the DNA, the regulation of the hemoglobin genes, as part of a worldwide effort of hundreds of labs that have dedicated themselves to attempting to cure this disease, because this disease is so important. Up to 300,000 children are born each year with sickle cell and other hemoglobinopathies. About 5% of the world's population carry clinically important mutation in the hemoglobin genes. It is absolutely spectacular how much progress Agnes has achieved in the last couple of years. The awareness, the support from the health minister, the support from the government. Australia has one of the best health systems in the world, and I think we will see great progress over the next 10 years. And in the area of molecular research that I'm in, I can absolutely assure you that the finest scientists in the world are daily turning their mind to this disorder. This was the first molecular genetic DNA disease ever defined by Linus Pauling in 1949. He won the Nobel Prize, and it will be the first genetic disease that is cured. I'm pretty confident that will happen within my lifetime, I hope, but it'll be the first of many genetic diseases that are being discovered and diagnosed, but sickle cell will be the one that leads the way. So I think this organisation, which has begun in Australia, will go from strength to strength in the years to come. So it's an absolute privilege to be here. I'm extremely impressed, and Australia is perfectly placed to really lead and make a huge contribution. So it's terrific to be here. But that's not my job. My job isn't to talk about all those things. My job is to introduce Dr Ifeyinwa Osunkwo, or Ife as he's known, and to listen, to learn about the clinical side of sickle cell, the nuanced complexities of transition from childhood to adult. All my life I've been a lab scientist and teacher at university and administrator. I don't know anything about the clinical side, so I come here to learn that. And without further ado, over to Ife. Thank you.
And I wanted to ask for permission to share my slides. Okay, share screen, perfect. There you go. Oh, no, that's not the beginning of the presentation. Let's start from the beginning. There you go. All right, well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Agnes. And I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present and emerging. I also extend my respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I also want to thank the ASCA conference planner, Agnes specifically, and everyone here. Hanna, it was amazing to listen to you and your testimony. I am so proud of you. Today, I have been asked to speak about transition from pediatric to adult care and really focus on the nuances. And I also want to do a little bit of contextual connection between newborn screening and transition. Because if you don't detect a condition, you don't have an opportunity to transition these young people into adult care. My name is Ifeyinwa Osunkwo. I'm a professor of medicine and pediatrics, and I'm also a chief patient officer at Forma Therapeutics. And it is my delight to be here today. These are my disclosures. Our goal today is to really review very briefly the sickle cell disease pathophysiology and then define healthcare transition in the context of the genetic condition sickle cell disease. I'm going to outline a systematic approach to how we can support young adults during transition and beyond, and then discuss the importance of optimizing their overall disease management and treatment to ensure that there's continuous care that is coordinated. And then really use 2 patient cases to discuss some of the challenges and opportunities to improve transition for sickle cell disease across the globe. And hopefully there'll be some Q&A at the end. You can put your questions in the chat as we go along, and I'll do my best to address it. So what is sickle cell disease? It's a complicated genetic condition. It's a disorder of hemoglobin quantity and quality. And the picture to my right, which may be to your left, is the sequence of events that happen between hemoglobin S polymerization that leads to hemolysis and sickling, vaso-occlusion, sterile inflammation from the ischemic reperfusion injury, you release free heme, that causes endothelial dysfunction, and that continues the cycle of progressive polymerization and sickling. But really, there is a biologic thing happening underneath the surface for every individual living with sickle cell disease. When Hanna talked about the fatigue, the pain, the hospitalizations, the clinic visits, she looks like a regular young adult. She has in her bloodstream this sickle cell pathophysiology happening underneath the surface. And unfortunately, people look at the individual and forget the biology behind the individual. So in pictorial form, red cells come out of the bone marrow, they sickle, they hemolyze, and they cause anemia. In the blood vessels, there's release of heme, the endothelial membrane gets damaged, the blood vessels get constricted, and there's stickiness of the cells, and there's vaso-occlusion. But at the end of the day, what does this cause? It causes pain, it causes anemia, but it also causes acute and chronic complications involving multiple systems in the body. Every organ from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet are affected by sickle cell disease. And your emotional state is affected by sickle cell disease. Your ability to cope with life and adjust to regular daily living is affected by sickle cell disease. Unfortunately, there is a 30-year lifespan differential in sickle cell disease compared to other ethnically matched controls, and there's a lot of poor quality of life and suffering. So it is a complicated, debilitating condition that requires that we think about it in a holistic and a proactive manner. It's rare in some countries like Australia with 1,000 individuals and in North America with 100,000 individuals. Not so rare in India or Sub-Saharan Africa with over 1 million in India and over 5 million in Sub-Saharan Africa. And some people believe that this is a Black or ethnic African disease, but as you can see by those in the room and who have been on the different platforms, it is a multi-ethnic global condition. I tend to look at life as a series of transitions, and it's not just for sickle cell disease. You're born, you become an adolescent, you become an adult, and then you become a senior, and the cycle continues. We're going to focus today on 2 transition stages, beginning with pediatrics and talking about the critical importance of newborn screening. Hanna mentioned that her mom was tested prenatally and she was diagnosed before she was even born. And that allowed her mother to plan for comprehensive care, penicillin prophylaxis, transcranial Doppler ultrasound, and getting education about how to take care of her daughter when her daughter was born. And there's been an evolution of newborn screening, at least from a U.S. perspective. I'm learning about this in the context of the globe. But in the 1960s, targeted population screening was the way to detect sickle cell disease. In the 1970s, the first newborn screening program was established in New York City in 1975. And about 10 years later, there was a study called the penicillin prophylactic study that showed that if you give babies who have sickle cell disease penicillin prophylaxis twice a day for the first 5 years of their life, you drop their risk of infection by 84%, and you reduce the mortality under 5 years of age for sickle cell disease dramatically. And that became a standard of care, and that also supported newborn screening being established for all babies all across the United States. But it took almost 20 years for that to happen. So by 2006, with a lot of advocacy and education and awareness, newborn screening is now established in all 50 states of the Union and DC across the United States. It's not perfect, but it's now there. And I think the goal for the global audience is that you look at sickle cell disease as a disease that is genetic, and if you pick it up early, you can intervene early and improve both childhood mortality and morbidity even through adulthood. So the benefits of newborn screening, it really allowed us to have the first transition in sickle cell disease, where a child lives past age 5 and actually lives into the teenage years. If you detect the disease early, you can put them on penicillin, and then you can also support them with comprehensive care. And with that, we have about a 98 to 99% overall survival of individuals with sickle cell disease up to age 18. And that is up from less than 5 years of age in the 1950s and 60s. So what about the second transition? Well, Teenagehood is the second transition, getting from being a teenager to an adult, a pretty critical time in everybody's life, whether you live with a chronic condition or not. And this is important because as a young adult, the goal is to have a plan and appropriate support to make sure that you are adherent to your treatment that keeps you healthy, you have a good self-image, and you have self-efficacy, and you have peers that help you not feel so alone. Hanna talked about the fact that she feels isolated, and then sometimes she has to stay indoors and may not have people hanging out with her. And when you have a chronic condition, there's a sense of isolation that really affects your cognitive and your emotional development. And this is a very important thing for young adults who friends are everything. It's all about the peer group. And we also have found that the data shows that in young adulthood, there is an increase in mortality in sickle cell disease. And so that's another reason why we have to pay attention to this age group. We want to see that the young adults are not having an increased number of deaths, that is 3 times those younger than those older. We want them to live well, healthy, and quality lives into their late adulthood and older adulthood. But unfortunately, even though the mortality in pediatric sickle cell disease is dropping and has reached a level where 98% will survive to age 18, amongst adults ages 19 and older, it is actually getting worse. What do we see? We see that the number of young adults, 18 to 35, they have the highest healthcare utilization, which means emergency room and admissions. They also spend the most number of days in the hospital. If you look at the age group 18 to 35, they spend over 41 days in the hospital compared to the ages younger than them and the ages older than them. This was found in the state of North Carolina in the U.S. In the state of Georgia, we also found that the average length of stay is higher in this young adult age group, and the number of readmissions to the hospital within 30 days is also higher in this age group. So again, increased morbidity, but the data also suggests that increased mortality is 3 times higher in the young adult age group compared to younger age group. We talked about the increased healthcare utilization, but there's also quality of life impacts. A lot of days of school missed. They have worse tests, standardized testing on their in school compared to controls. If you're too sick to go to school, you can't learn, you can't graduate from high school and go on to university and get a job and have a good quality of life. So for you to really understand this second transition, which is adolescence to adulthood, you have to also understand the psychology of adolescence. Young adults want to stand up and develop their own identity and pursue autonomy. They want to fit in. They want to be like their peers. They want to be quote unquote normal. They want to measure up and develop competencies and be independent, and they want to take hold of their own commitments and goals and beliefs, separate from their parents, separate from their peers, and separate from their providers. So there's a normal psychological process that is disrupted in adolescence by chronic illness and by sickle cell disease. And this can cause cognitive deficits and psychosocial distress that drives the increased morbidity and mortality we see in young adulthood. So let's talk about 2 young adults. One has sickle cell disease and one does not. So the first one, who was born in January, 16-year-old female with no chronic illness, very smart young girl in private school, has older siblings with ADHD who are both in college, and then began to have dropping of her grades in math and AP World History when she went during the pandemic. So second week of virtual school, she doesn't return her work. And when her teacher asked her, her parents asked her, what's going on, January? She said, I don't like virtual school. I want to go back to regular school. I don't feel like doing the dishes. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I mean, how many of you have a young adult in your family or children who are young adults, and you can understand that this is what they do? They just become suddenly oppositional and defiant and almost regress into being babies. And when she says she wants to go back to regular school, this was in the height of the pandemic. And I'm like, girl, there's a pandemic going on. You have to understand you can't go back to school. You have to adapt to your environmental situation. Her teacher was worried that she may have a learning difficulty. I'll give you the bottom line. She ended up going to NYU, which is one of the premier colleges in New York, and she's in London for her freshman year. She has no developmental issue, no chronic illness. She suffers from the disease called adolescence, which means I'm going to buck authority, do things my way until I learn from my mistakes. Fortunately for her, she had a great social network, great peers, great teachers, and great family structure, and she had nothing limiting her cognition and her physical ability, so she was able to navigate this age group successfully. Now meet November, who's 21 years old with hemoglobin SC. He is 6'5", and he just left the pediatric hospital to the adult clinic 9 months ago. And in the past 1 year, he's had 26 emergency room visits and 8 admissions for pain. That is a lot of acute care utilization for a young adult. He looks like a basketball player. He's on optimal treatment for his sickle cell disease. He has a very complicated past medical history with chronic lung disease from sarcoidosis in his lungs, his ears, his GI tract. He's hypertensive, has a vascular necrosis. And in his social history, he had a girlfriend who dumped him at age 19 that caused a lot of devastation emotionally, and he actually had some suicidal ideation. He has not been coming for his appointments or taking his medication, and he's been labeled as non-compliant by the medical system. And what is the issue? He really wants to be normal. He doesn't want to have sickle cell disease or sarcoidosis. He doesn't want to be in the hospital. He wants to do what his friends do, but when he does what his friends do, in this case, it's called drunk bingo, which is a game I just learned about when I met this young man. Basically, you play bingo, and when you get on the point that says take a drink, you take a shot of hard liquor. And he said, Dr. Ify, I'm not a really good bingo player, because he had to take a lot of shots. He got drunk and he got sick and ended up in the hospital. But if you think about why would a 21-year-old act like this, it really is this adolescent mentality of being like their friends, not being different, not standing out, not being isolated. Poor choice for somebody with sickle cell disease, but a normal behavior when you think about the disease of adolescence. And really during this period of time, you have a convergence of body image, sexuality, peer relationship, and independence fighting for dominance. They want to do it their way. They don't want to learn from your mistake. They want to learn from their mistake. And it's all about their friends and their social image, and there's a lot of emotions running around. I tend to joke that in adolescence, the brain is overcome by sex, drugs, peer pressure, music, and friends, and very, very little thought is given to college, the future, job. That frontal lobe is not very activated during this period of time, and it's all about rebellion and mood and sleep. So it's a very negative, emotional-driven period of time. And if you don't understand this, you may withdraw support when they need it the most, or you may blame them for their normal behavior, which is what all their friends do. And to put a little bit of brevity on this, how do young adults feel about adulting? I remember when I was younger, I had an asthma attack and I was taken to the emergency room, and I was over the age of 18, so they took me to the adult emergency room, and I woke up and I was already a doctor. And I said, take me to the pediatric ER. I don't want to be in the adult ER. Sometimes young adults don't want to face the reality of being an adult. They begin to rescind into childhood behavior because they don't want to face the responsibility. These are little memes that kind of talk about how, they have this outer body reasoning that is irrational when you really think about it logically, but that's how they avoid things that they think is unpleasant in the future. So what is transition? It's a fact of life. Everybody has to go through it. You have no choice. If Tuesday becomes Wednesday, a child is going to go from being a child to a young person to an adult. And in that case, they're going to end up going from the pediatric clinic to the adult clinic at some point in their life. They cannot be on the pediatric side when they're 45 years old. And there's a definition. It's defined as a purposeful, planned, and coordinated process moving from a pediatric-focused way of doing healthcare to an adult-focused way of doing healthcare. It's dynamic, so it doesn't just follow a straight line. There's ups and downs, there's going forward and going backward in this process, and it goes throughout your entire life. Like I said, there's 4 stages: childhood, young adulthood, adulthood, and senior life or geriatrics. And the goal is to have them meet their individual needs as they move along the trajectory and maximize their lifelong potential and functioning. The interesting thing that we tend to forget is that you really move in transition according to how your brain develops. If you have cognitive deficits, you can only move as fast as your brain allows you to move. And it's also important that healthcare is uninterrupted during this period of time. Otherwise, you end up with the fail of transition. In very simplistic terms, graduating high school is one goal for young adults. But we want them to have, what I call it buns of steel, where they are able to stand alone and survive what life throws at them, like Superman. Life is complicated. Being an adult is complicated. You have bills, you have relationships, you have school, work, expectations, responsibilities. Can you handle them? That's what adult transition success is all about. But it's a process, and the idea is to prepare a young adult for the changing in their medical care. You know, adults have to talk to their doctor directly. In pediatrics, the pediatric doctor talks to the parents. You know, they're going to have a difference in their health insurance coverage. They're going to have a difference in their responsibilities with their self-care. I don't think you should be 21 and your mother will be dressing you. I think you can dress yourself. You can drive yourself to your doctor's appointment. You have to plan for independence. But the goal is to have continuous access to high quality medical care and a good quality of life with good functioning as you do this. And remember that just because you go from pediatric clinic to the adult clinic, that is not transition. That's called transfer. The process of gaining independence in this transfer is what we call transition. Now, becoming an adult is complicated, and many young adults don't want to do that. You know, some of them say, you know what, I don't want to do this. I'm going to hide under my blanket, and you cannot make me do this. But you have to realize that this is a normal process, and I tend to use reverse psychology as a hematologist to work with my young adults and say, you know what, you want to be independent, so how can we help you be independent? What are the things you can practice now when you're 16 so that by the time you're 21, you can truly run your own show? You know, the support has to be intentional, tailored, realistic. You cannot expect a young adult who had a stroke when they were 10 to be able to, you know, do quantum mathematics when they're 22. That's not going to work, right? So you have to tailor what you expect from them based on their cognitive capacity and the developmental stage. And then just because they learned it when they were 22 doesn't mean they're going to remember that when they're 26. There's going to be constant reinforcement about the skills that they use to get from peds to adult care to remain in adult care. Because they do tend to go one step forward and then 3 steps back. It's a constant battle between, do I want to do adulting or do I want to go back to being a child where my mother and my father takes care of everything for me? So who needs to transition? I put this meme here because a lot of times the young adult is in the middle, the providers are on one side and the parents on the other side. There's this tug of war going on. The parents want to drive the ship because they're worried about their child dying from sickle cell disease. The adult doctor thinks that they're adults that can handle themselves. The pediatric doctor thinks that, oh, I need to be the one to buffer them because I don't trust the adult provider. And none of these people are talking to each other in a way that makes sense or that is collaborative. And then you have the community support systems that are trying to help the young adults, but may not even know what help they need. And so there's a lot of parallel work going on. And so who needs to transition? And I put it to you that is it the patient? Is it the parents? Is it the pediatric or the adult provider? Is it the community? Or is it all of the above? The way you work with a child with sickle cell disease or any chronic illness, starting at age 13, is not the same way you're going to work with that person when they become 21. You should expect a 21-year-old to have certain independent life skills, taking their own medication, knowing the medications, knowing how to talk to the adult provider, compared to what you would expect a 10-year-old to do. And all of us have to change our expectations as the child gets older. It really is a gradual letting go of control from the parental side and the pediatric side, and the child getting more control and then accessing their adult team and their community-based team independently, and knowing who to go to when they need help, but being really truly the driver of their bus, their life bus. Now, we have to remember that sickle cell faces a lot of health disparities. It is actually the ultimate health disparity condition. You know, you have a biology of sickle cell disease that we talked about in the beginning, but it also is intersecting with race, ethnicity, cognition, opioids, and stigma. And so this makes it a little bit more complicated than just having a simple chronic illness or just being a young adult. And you have to interface with your community, you have to interface with your living environment, social networks, social services, housing, education, and vocation, and then the social, cultural, global policies that affect how you access care. For example, can you get screening for sickle cell disease when you get pregnant or when you get married? Can you and your partner get tested for, if your partner has sickle cell disease trait, for pre-genetic, procreation planning? And your social determinants impact how well you do. You know, if you're in a 2-parent home, you have all the resources, transportation and education, then yeah, maybe things may be a little bit easier. Not necessarily. But if you're struggling with food, you're struggling with education, you have poor health care, you have poor neighborhood resources, you have a lot of discrimination and stigma, then you're going to face a lot of issues in addition to your disease, in addition to being a young adult. It's a heavy pill to swallow. So healthcare, both during and after transition, has to be flexible. has to be responsive to the need of the individual, has to be comprehensive and continuous and appropriate to development, but most importantly, it has to be coordinated. And how do you do this? You need a quarterback. Every individual with sickle cell disease needs somebody who is on their side, not their mom and dad, who is linking them between the providers, the community, and their caregivers. Because they cannot do it by themselves. Sometimes they can, but most of the time it's really hard to do all that navigating on their own. And if they have their medical condition to deal with as well, it can be quite overwhelming. It also has to start early. If you begin to talk about, you're going to see an adult doctor when you're 18, at the age of 17, it's too late. They have to understand that sickle cell is not a death sentence that they were told when they were younger, and as they're getting older, they need to plan to live. I had a guy I met who was age 40, and he said, Dr. Ify, I've been waiting to die since I was 14, and I'm 40 years old and I'm not dead yet, and I have no idea what to do with my life. We have to help our young adults plan to live and begin to think about what does life look like for me when I'm 40, when I'm 30, when I'm 20, and not just sit and wait for life to happen to them without them having any control about it. And there are models out there. There's a wonderful model called the www.godtransition.org for my providers in the audience that talks about the 6 core elements of transition, and it gives you a roadmap of how to implement a transition program that is consistent, coordinated, and continuous between pediatrics and adult care. It has 6 elements, including a policy has to be made and very well shared with both the pediatric team and the adult team, and the parents and the community. You have to have a way of tracking your patients. See if they're ready for transition, and if they're not ready, how can you help them get ready? What plans are you putting in place to help them make decisions on their own, but beginning with sharing those decisions with their parents, their family members, and their providers. And then there has to be a formal handoff or transfer of care, but ongoing follow-up to make sure that they stay in care and that they retain the skills they learned in pediatrics, even past the transfer of care. And the model is based out of the biopsychosocial ecological model. It targets life skills training, not just healthcare skills training, and it really should involve the patient and members of the community. For example, Agnes and your team, helping them learn how to advocate for themselves, how to access resources in the community. Because healthcare is not just the only component of their life that needs support. They spend most of their life outside of the hospital, outside of healthcare. They have to be able to live life and manage their disease at the same time. We did a study that was funded by the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute called PCORI, and it was a sickle cell Trevor Thompson transition project. Trevor was a sickle cell warrior who passed away at age 45, I believe, who was an educator and a peer mentor expert. And he helped us think about how we can support young adults with transition. And his philosophy was, if they have peer support and you structure their sickle cell support, then that's the best of both worlds. I'm going to focus on the standardized arm, which was putting together a structured education-based program to help young adults as they navigate their healthcare during transition. And it required a robust stakeholder engagement, the pediatric team, the adult team, the community-based organization, and the patient, and the family and caregivers as a quadrant. So what do? We asked the patients, what do you think is one of the things that we can do to make sure that you do well during transition? And all of them said, we want a treatment plan for when we get sick. It's called an individualized emergency care plan and a disease management plan. And it's a plan for how to manage their sickle cell disease and how to manage their pain when they get sick, whether they go to the emergency room or the hospital. But the goal is that every individual has this plan so that they know what to do at home, what to do when they're feeling well, and then what to do when they're not feeling well, and how to access resources when there's an emergency. And the goal was to help each program, both the pediatric program and the adult program, using quality improvement, implement this process across every place where the patient is seen. This is an example of the acute treatment plan. One side is what you do at home, the other side is what you do when you go to the hospital, and this is where the providers have an individualized approach to treating sickle cell disease pain for each patient. People are different sizes, different weights, different responses to the medications. It doesn't make sense to treat the 6'5" young man the same way to treat a 5'1" young woman. So what do we find? We found that in the beginning, all the clinics, both the pediatric clinic and the adult clinic, had low scores on their standard process of how they do sickle cell disease care. But over the course of 2 years, they all got better, and they began to put in place this standard structure for doing sickle cell disease care, and they were able to improve both on the pediatric side and on the adult side. We are now at month 54, and almost every single program, both adults and pediatrics, has reached a threshold of 90%, where they are adherent to the standard operating procedure for how to do transition in pediatrics and also in adult care. 14 clinics, 14 pediatric clinics, 14 adult clinics. All but one adult clinic had reached that threshold. And this is impressive because you want to be able to make sure that when Hannah goes to the doctor as a child, she gets the same kind of care as when she goes to the doctor when she's an adult. And the focus is to help our young adults increase their self-efficacy. This is where they master how to take care of themselves, how to speak to other adult stakeholders, how to avoid peer pressure that can impact them negatively, and to learn how to understand their physiological cues. I'm feeling not too well. I should really kind of pace myself. I think I'm doing well enough to go play soccer today. I don't think I'm feeling good enough to go play soccer today. You listen to their body, and they develop their own capacity to perform successfully different tasks that impact their health. You know, we really encourage that we work on helping them with this process early in their development. You want to measure that they're learning how to be self-efficacious. You want to use targeted interventions to kind of help them, a lot of therapy, peer-based modeling, and then let them practice. In my clinic, I would have them practice how to talk to the adult doctor. You know, pretend I'm your new adult doctor. Talk to me as if you're talking to him. What are you afraid of? What coping skills do you need? And then do this role play. And then you gradually expose them to the adult system until they become very comfortable. And don't forget the role that peers, people who've done it before and done it well, can help educate and support our young adults who are going through that process. There's a lot of data to support self-efficacy as a positive influencer of transition. And basically what the studies show is that as self-efficacy increases, their symptoms decrease. They tend to have better self-management, better disease management, and better quality of life over time. So in my mind, I think of transition as a collaboration between the patient and providers, adults and pediatrics, their caregivers or parents, and the community-based organization. And it has to require multiple bi-directional communication loops. But it really is gradual transferring of the certificate of ownership of their life and their health care from the parent now becoming owned by the patient themselves as an adult, where you're sitting side by side with the doctor versus your parents talking to you or your community-based liaison talking to the doctor on your behalf. So they go into adult care, now what? Well, there is this misconception that once they get handed over to the adult doctor, that everything is fine and it's going to be kumbaya, kumbaya. Well, that's not true. Think about when you were 18, 19, and 20. You know, you thought you knew everything, and then you learned that, you know, that you're not that smart. You may have more things to learn. You lose confidence. If we don't reinforce what you've learned over time, you're going to lose those skills. So the goal is that with every change in environment, there's a risk of losing prior acquired skills. There's going to be turbulence. When kids go off to university, they tend to have that first year is very difficult. You know, they need the parents, they need the providers, they need the system to help them. You want to identify medical barriers. Are they having difficulties with their emotions? Are they stressed? You know, how can you help build on their strengths and allay their fears? And teach them, reteach them, and help them relearn the skills they had when they were on the pediatric side. Don't make them feel bad about themselves and say, you know what, let me remind you of our policy. You know, it's good to give them the rules, but share those rules with soft gloves. So my adult providers in the room, give them a little bit of grace as they stumble in the first 3 to 6 months, maybe even a year. You know, we have a policy, if you're 15 minutes late, you have to reschedule. But with my young adults, I try to hold them accountable, but give them a little bit of grace. You know, we will support you with this resource to help you meet this expectation and remind you with this resource. And yes, we may hold you accountable, but do it in a way that is not cutting the cord completely, but kind of a gradual loosening of the cord, because these kids need a little bit more support as they navigate their disease and adolescence at the same time. About 15 years ago, my adult colleague and myself and my sickle cell team and our patients came up with something called the 18 Steps to 18. And it was a developmental-based skill set of self-management that we expected people to learn and be very good at by the time they turned 18. It's called the 18 Steps to 18 Healthcare Transition Self-Management Milestones. And Agnes, I'm going to give you these slides. You can share them with your providers as an open access tool. But really, it's based on what do you expect a 13-year-old to be able to do, and then what do you expect an 18-year-old to be able to do and do well. You know, a 13-year-old should be able to know who their doctor is, their name, the phone number, and the address. They need to know why they see their primary care doctor and why they see their hematologist. And they should know that they should drink a lot of water, they should get 30 minutes of exercise, and eat a healthy diet. They should also know by age 15 what medicines they take, how much they take, and why. You know, by age 18, they should be able to go to their doctor's appointment, call and make the appointment on their own, and reschedule if they're not going to be able to make it. They should know their triggers by the age of 16 to 18, that what triggers their pain crisis and avoid them, understand their health risk, and actively manage them. But by 18, they should have at least one other individual that they feel comfortable sharing about their sickle cell disease with. It's very important to avoid that isolation, because isolation leads to poor outcomes. If you're in the college dorm or university dorm and you're sick and nobody knows you have sickle cell disease and you don't have anybody to call to take you to the doctor, that could be dangerous. We've had many sudden bad outcomes happen because young adults are too embarrassed or too shy or uncomfortable sharing about their disease to other people. They should have a goal of what to do after they finish secondary school or high school, either going to get a job or go to university. And they should have a relationship with their local community-based organization, just like Hanna does, where they learn about life, living life with sickle cell disease in society. It's not just a medical condition, it's a social condition as well. But it takes a village to live well with sickle cell disease and to survive transition. You know, you not only need to connect with your peers and your coordinator, who's your quarterback, your parents and your caregivers, your community networks, your medical team, but social work, psychology or mental health, your educational team, your hospital, your pharmacy, your emergency department, the employment sector, insurance, government bodies. This is a lifelong, multi-system condition. It's not just a medical condition. Sometimes most of the impact of sickle cell disease is mental and emotional and social, where they feel different, they feel like they're behind, they don't have access to resources, they're embarrassed about sharing that they cannot be in a conference room when the temperature is too cold, they don't want to dress differently from other people during the different seasons. You know, they don't want to say that I don't drink alcohol because everybody else at that age drinks and smokes. And so there's a lot to think about in a holistic manner. It's extremely important that all these members of this team work together collaboratively. It cannot be just one person working with the patient. There has to be cross-communication across all these networks. And the coordinator is a quarterback to help the young adults develop that competence and comfort in advocating for themselves. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I work with a company called Forma Therapeutics. We are a mid-stage biotech company developing a medication for sickle cell disease and thalassemia. And we put together this open access resource toolkit called formabridge.com. And it really has things like information about transition support, insurance tips and tricks. There's some YouTube and TikTok videos. There's a trend report that talks about the state of transition in sickle cell disease and where the gaps are. And we also actually recently put out a number of grants totaling $1 million to support research to improve young adult transition in sickle cell disease. But it's important to remember that sickle cell disease is a complicated disease. Being a young adult is a complicated disease, and having the two makes it even more complicated. They need support from their medical team and their biopsychosocial team to be able to navigate this process together. And when you're working with young adults, remember that you were once a young adult, and think about the things that you went through as a young adult, and multiply that by a factor of 100. That's how much worse it can be for somebody with a chronic lifelong illness. And remember that you have to help them with not just healthcare self-efficacy, but life skills self-efficacy. Psychosocial and emotional support is a must, and it takes a village. And there needs to be more research in this area to really model, how to support them, what kind of payment models are important, and also how do we avoid interruptions of care? Because the typical young adult wants to grow up and leave home and not be bothered by their doctor or their parent. But that's a dangerous place to be. I would recommend that as a provider, you don't focus only on treating their disease medically, but treat them holistically as an individual. Let them understand the why things happen to them and what they can do to avoid and mitigate that, and just listen to them and encourage them. Sometimes the best thing I do in my clinic is to tell my young adults that I'm so proud of them, that the work they've done and how much they've overcome, that it's amazing, and I'm so, so proud of them. I have some resources and references at the back of this talk, and I'm going to pause, stop sharing my screen, and open it up to questions. Thank you very much. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. You can either put it in the chat if you're online, or you can come to the podium microphone. I'm not sure, Agnes, how it's set up, but I'll defer to the moderator.
Yeah, maybe we'll just take one question, if there's any question. All right. Yeah. Do you want to come to the mic just so you can be heard? Oh, there's a roving one. Great, thank you.
Just around the premarital screening, are we also going to be advocating around that as well? Or so the
question was
premarital. So when two couples want to get married, they're from the same demographic, so both Middle Eastern. Does the obstetricianist have a duty of care to ask the individuals if they wish to be screened for a genetic disorder or not?
Absolutely. Actually, as part of pediatric training, every provider is taught that when you see teenagers, you need to begin your genetic counseling as early as 13. With sickle cell disease, you have to understand that this is a genetic disease. But definitely during premarital counseling, we encourage all of our patients with sickle cell disease to truly understand the genetics. They have sickle cell disease, so they have two genes that are affected. If they have a baby or marry somebody with a trait, they have double the chance of making a child with sickle cell disease. They have to understand that. But it's not just sickle cell disease, it's also thalassemia, other genetically transmitted diseases. It's critically important to help them understand that. And sometimes what the community groups do, they play games around, who should you marry? When John and Mary get together, you have the trait, you have the disease, what do you do? They have all these different board games they play to kind of help show them how to make it more practically understandable. But that's why it's important that we don't rely only on the doctors, because you typically don't get the young adult until they're pregnant. You want them to hear about this in school, at the community group, in their social networks, online, on media, because young adults, they don't listen to the typical people, they listen to each other. So if they all understand it, then, don't do that because, you have the trait, you have a baby, you're going to have a sickle cell child. In some countries there's a mandate, in other countries it's really informed decision making, which is what I would advocate for. Early and often, make it clear, make it stigma free, so that people understand that this is just part of life. It's not just sickle cell, it's every genetic disorder. There should be an awareness and education about that before they are of the age where they have making babies together. Because if you wait till they're 18, they're already having sex, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Ify.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Great. I'll hand over to Mwewa.
Thank you, awesome MC Mayase. Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? You're looking a little bit subdued. Are you cold? Are you cold? No? You're doing good? Awesome. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed our session so far, and my name is Mwewa, if I haven't said so already. I'm Mwewa Chisenga. I live in Adelaide. I'm a mother of two gorgeous women living with sickle cell disease. And so this, for me, I'm just so excited and just soaking it in. But I feel sorry for my children's consultants because I'm going to be armed with a lot of information when we go for our sessions, yeah? Like, what about this, doctor? What about this? And what about this? But anyway, Just want to take this opportunity and privilege and honor to introduce Dr. Kylie Mason, one of our keynote speakers. Dr. Kylie Mason is a clinical hematologist and translational researcher with a joint appointment at the University of Melbourne doing an NHMRC fellowship. She leads the late effects and survivorship stream within the VCCC and has an interest in adolescent and young adult hematology with an honorary appointment at the On Track Youth Cancer Services. Lots of work. I did a bit of Googling about Dr. Kylie Mason and the work she has done and the work she has done. So without taking up too much of her time, please join me in welcoming Dr. Kylie Mason.
Thanks, Nsofwa. Am I going to be? No. I felt like it was going to fall on me for a moment then. I've been tasked this morning with giving a very general overview of what is sickle disease, entitled Sickle 101, and it may be that this is very familiar to a lot of you, but it also may be that you pick up some points. I'm also very aware that quite a number of these topics are going to be touched on in quite a lot more detail later in the day, so this really is just very much a general overview. So I am an adult haematologist. I work at the Royal Melbourne Hospital and the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre, and I've developed the sickle cell program at the Royal Melbourne Hospital, where we have around 60 patients with a fairly transient population, also really a bimodal population. We have a large number of young people between the ages of 18 to 25 who are university and in their young adult lives, and work very closely with the Royal Children's Hospital in our transition program. We also have a reasonable number of patients who are in the later stages of transition. So we actually have patients in their 70s with sickle cell disease, and that brings a whole new level of complications with sickle cell disease when they have multiple other medical problems that are normal for ageing, but the complexities of living a life with sickle cell disease just make that much more complex. So that's the background I'm coming from, and here's a bit of a whirlwind tour of sickle cell disease. So hopefully there we go. So what is sickle cell disease? And we know that it's already been pointed out by a previous speaker, and as we know, it's an inherited red blood cell disorder, and it was named, of course, after the sickle, and the sickle is, as shown there, is a traditional farming tool that's used to sort of chop wheat and such. And it was named that because of the unique appearance of the red cells when they're looked at down the microscope, that as you can see there, comparing those two pictures, that you can see that indeed there's a commonality between the shape of the sickle and the shape of the sickle red blood cell. So the problem is that these sickle red blood cells die early, resulting in a shortage of red blood cells effectively in the system. And also, probably more so, that they're quite inflexible and sticky, and so they result in essentially a blocking, particularly of the small red blood cells, and there are certain circumstances that make that more common to happen. So this results in a syndrome of acute and chronic pain, in organ damage, in increased risk of infection, and it may be, for many people, as we've heard, life-limiting. The sickle cell disease manifests very, very differently in very different people, and I'll touch on why that is in some ways, but also we don't really understand completely why that is in everybody. We have, and certainly in our practice, we have sets of siblings, for example, who have the same genetic mutation, the same upbringing, the same environmental factors, yet they have wildly different presentations with their sickle cell disease. So it's been known for centuries by African tribes about sickle cell disease, and it was earliest reported is actually in the 1600s in Ghana. And African cultures, and you can see there, and I'm not going to pretend to pronounce these names, but they have names for sickle cell disease that really describes the pain and the suffering that some of the, what they called victims, will go through with sickle cell disease, we now call warriors. We've heard also already about the distribution of sickle cell disease internationally and how this, in some ways, particularly with the trait, parallels the incidence of malaria, and with the sickle cell trait having some protective properties around malaria. And hence, as you can see there in Australia, the relative incidence of sickle cell disease is very low as compared to internationally, but as mentioned already, over 300,000 babies born per year with sickle cell disease, and many of our sickle cell patients in Australia are in fact not born here, unlike Hanna, who we heard earlier, but are in fact immigrating here through patterns of immigration, which have changed distinctly over the last few years. So to understand what sickle cell disease is, we need to understand a little bit about what normal haemoglobin is. So haemoglobin, most simply, is the protein that makes red blood red. You often hear about blood being red when it's carrying oxygen and blood being blue when it's coming back to the heart, which is deoxygenated or not carrying oxygen. So the typical adult haemoglobin is made up of 4 alpha chains and 2 beta chains, and each of those holds an atom of iron. And oxygen binds to these atoms in the haemoglobin and is therefore transported throughout the blood. So haemoglobin is just a carrier protein really for oxygen. The haemoglobin changes from when we are babies in embryo through development to around 6 to 12 months of age to achieve what we call an adult haemoglobin. It's this adult haemoglobin that babies have from around 6 or more months of age that has the 4 alpha and 2 beta chains. And it's the alpha and beta chains, or the alpha and beta globin genes, and they're not genetically linked. So people can inherit a problem with the beta chains and a problem with the alpha chains separately. And so it gives you that mix of the two. Problems with alpha and beta chains are often also called thalassemias, and I'll touch on those a little bit later. Alpha 2 beta 2 is the optimal configuration for oxygen carrying, and alpha 2 refers to the fact that the alpha chains join in dimers, so it's 2 alpha chains together. So sickle haemoglobin is the result of a single mutation in the 6th position of the beta globin gene. And essentially that changes one amino acid to another, and that makes haemoglobin S, and we refer to it often as HbS. So HbS doesn't hold on to oxygen as well. It doesn't flex and bend, it becomes sticky, it becomes inflexible, and it has a shortened lifespan as compared to typical red blood cells. It, under certain circumstances, particularly when it gets deoxygenated, so in a situation where there's low oxygen pressure, it results in sickle cells polymerizing or joining together and clotting together, or that stickiness that I've already mentioned. When you have inheritance of a single sickle cell gene, you have HbS as a single sickle cell trace, HbS and 1 HbA, which HbA is normal haemoglobin. When you have inherited 2 sickle cell genes, you have HbSS or sickle cell disease. But you can have sickle cell disease when you inherit a sickle cell trace, so a single HbS gene, with a beta thalassemia gene or a hemoglobin C mutation, for example. And that also causes a sickle cell disease, being the clinical manifestations of sickling. So what do these cells do? Well, these stiff and sticky red cells cause occlusion in the small vessels, and this results in, at a very simple level, blockage of the small vessels, which results also then in release of multiple combination of proteins and enzymes, essentially at a simple level, that then result in tissue damage. So this happens much more when there's relative pressures on the cells, so if they're dehydrated, for example, or if they're low in oxygen areas, and these blockages cause local inflammation and release of these mediators, and nitric oxide being one of the key mediators. And that's important when we're looking at some of the new treatments for sickle cell disease and how they might work. So these sickled red cells have a much shorter half-life than normal haemoglobin, and this increased destruction results in the anemia and also in the jaundice that we also see in a number of people with sickle cell disease. So how does sickle cell disease present? And one of the biggest issues with this is that sickle cell disease, as we've already heard as well, can affect almost every organ in the body. And so sickle cell disease can present either as in young people, and often does present in childhood, but can also present in young adulthood, with a myriad of different features and symptoms, but very commonly with pain. And you can see there, and I won't go through every individual organ system, but really every organ system in the body is potentially affected by sickle cell disease. So how do we diagnose sickle cell disease? And I think really the first thing is someone needs to think of it, and that's where raising awareness and sessions like today are so important. Typically, the blood film findings can be quite pathognomonic in that, looking at the blood film and seeing these particular sickle cells really raises the alert from any haematologist looking at that blood should be reporting that. So the classical sickle cells you can see there on the blood film, as you can see, look like the ones that I showed more graphically in the earlier slide, that you can see there, these classical sort of sickle-shaped cells, but often they've not got that typical curve. They're more sort of a flatter curve, but quite a typical look for people who are familiar with looking at blood films. The next test that we do really to confirm that this is a sickle hemoglobin is what's called a hemoglobin electrophoresis. So this is essentially running a blood sample. We place it on an electric charged plate effectively and run that blood across, and so different hemoglobins come out at different levels, and that pattern we know and are familiar with can help us differentiate between different types of hemoglobins, and that's how we can tell if it's a hemoglobin S, a hemoglobin A, a hemoglobin F, for example, and those patterns allow doctors and pathologists to differentiate that. The ultimate diagnosis is with genetic screening, but for many patients this diagnosis with hemoglobin electrophoresis is more than adequate to define their disease. So what are important prognostic factors with sickle cell disease? And this is really talking about the medical biology. A lot of the prognostic factors with sickle cell disease relate a lot to the social and environmental factors that someone might find themselves in as well. But hemoglobin F, which is another form of hemoglobin, fetal hemoglobin, is highly prognostic for sickle cell disease. And hemoglobin F is the fetal hemoglobin we have when we're embryonic, essentially. The higher level of hemoglobin F, the lower level of hemoglobin S. And this is the principle of treatment with hydroxyurea, which increases the level of hemoglobin F. Interestingly, a number of other chemotherapeutic agents, such as methotrexate, for example, can also increase the hemoglobin F, but the toxicity of them is such that you wouldn't routinely use them. But for example, we have a patient with rheumatoid arthritis who is on regular methotrexate treatment for their rheumatoid arthritis, and her hemoglobin F is higher than we're seeing with a lot of patients of ours who are on hydroxyurea. I'd certainly not recommend anyone goes on a chemotherapeutic agent like hydroxyurea, like methotrexate, for prevention of sickle cell disease complications. But it's just circumstances whereby this works quite well and is demonstrated to work quite well in principle. So the amount of F actually varies between different sickle cells. So even though we might measure the F percentage to say be 20% in someone, that is spread across different sickle cells. So some cells might actually have 50% F and others might be as low as 5% or so. And so you still get sickling and you still have a differential level of sickling, but there is certainly a demonstrated benefit of hemoglobin F levels of greater than 10% for a clinical benefit in less sickle cell crises. Hydroxyurea, I've already mentioned, it works in this principle by increasing the hemoglobin F levels. And some people naturally have a high level of F with their sickle cell disease or with various types of thalassemia, and that can make a big difference in itself. So it's important to understand what your hemoglobin F level is as well as hemoglobin S. Alpha thalassemia is also a prognostic factor. So thalassemia is a disorder that's characterised by a low or decreased hemoglobin production. And alpha thalassemia is not uncommon, particularly in people of an Asian or African backgrounds, and again in that sort of Mediterranean split. The direct connection between the number of alpha globin genes and the number of sickle cell genes can actually reduce the problems with sickle cell disease, because it's all about the making of hemoglobin in those patterns of alpha and beta cells, and sickle cell, of course, being a problem with the beta cell chains. So interestingly, both when you have sickle cell disease and alpha thalassemia together, you actually often have a milder disease, even though it may seem it could be worse because you have two problems. In fact, you often have a milder disease because it's somewhat protective, because you're making less of the hemoglobins that are that typical alpha-4 chains with the two sickle chains, for example. However, the clinical implications are quite varied, and there is no clear guarantee that people who do have an alpha thalassemia with sickle cell disease are not going to have problems with their sickle cell disease. And there's a lot of clinical variation, as there is with everyone with sickle cell disease. So the other feature is the beta haplotype. So by haplotype, it essentially means even though we know that sickle cell disease is caused by this one mutation, there are points in the genome or in the genetic code that are around this mutation that affect how these genes work. And we know that from different regions of the African areas and also in the Indian or Asian variant, that in fact these have prognostic features, and we see typically patterns. So people who have got the variant that we inherit from India. So a lot of people who have sickle cell disease who are of an Indian origin tend to have a lot milder disease and have less problems, but they do have more leg ulcers. Less leg ulcers, but they have less, overall they come to hospital less. Splenomegaly, though, is very common as compared to many people with more of the African subtypes where they have become effectively functionally asplenic in childhood or very early age. And you can see there, even within the African variants, there are varying degrees of clinical disease. So in Australia, we've already highlighted that this is a very rare disease and we don't have exact patient numbers. And again, it's been highlighted by Ngaire Elwood earlier, our chairperson, that this is really critical. And I know the haemoglobinopathy registry is going some way to try and address this, as is ASCA, but it is very critical when it comes to government decision making to have this sort of information. We do know that most of the sickle cell disease in Australia is clustered in the major cities following the migration patterns. But there are certainly cases in regional Australia as well. The increasing population of sickle cell disease is really due to particularly due to migration, in that a very small number of babies are born in Australia with sickle cell disease, and the vast majority of new patients to Australia are coming in through patterns of migration. And certainly we are seeing in our local practice a large number of overseas students coming in, so we'll receive only 2 or 3 patients transitioning per year from the paediatric sector, yet we'll often receive 5 to 10 new patients per year into our practice through international students or new migrants to the area. And so that certainly is certainly locally in Melbourne. I know the pattern's repeated elsewhere. As far as adults, we're seeing most coming in from overseas. One of the issues with patients who are coming in directly from overseas is they haven't received the excellent paediatric care that's available in Australia, and so they often come to us with a lot more problems as adults than we might see from patients who have transitioned through the paediatric sector in Australia. One of the benefits, I think, of care in Australia of sickle cell disease, even though it is rare and even though we might talk about knowledge and general knowledge and advocacy being missing in some areas, we do have very boutique clinics, and so we know all of our patients one-on-one and have a very personable relationship with them, as compared to some of the clinics we speak to in the UK or the US, where they're processing hundreds of patients per day and don't have that personal knowledge. We know all of our patients. Our nurse knows their UR numbers off by heart, for example, and their phone numbers, and we do, and I think our patients do benefit from that very close relationship. And I think that is a real advantage to being a rare disease in Australia. You have a small but dedicated group of healthcare professionals. So what are the principles of management? And again, these have already been touched on somewhat, but around diagnosis and counselling, around comprehensive health maintenance, and I really can't stress enough how important that is, having plans and managing acute crises, and then treatment of chronic complications. So what is comprehensive health maintenance? And it really is around a multidisciplinary team focused and including the patient, their support people, whether that's family, other carers, their medical practitioners, allied health, and everybody involved in their care. It's around attending regular scheduled appointments, and this is to receive and develop and discuss current health problems, future plans for health problems, to review results and to review progress, and to complete and continue a standard health maintenance program. So this should be planned from very early ages, as we've heard, continued through transition and finessed through adulthood as things change. And these health maintenance plans will change regularly as priorities change, not just as their health needs change, but as their psychosocial and other needs change as well. It's a really important point when we're doing comprehensive health maintenance about education of the patient and family, and this may include at different points education around transition, education around genetic counselling and screening, preparation for future childbearing, education around the workplace and rights and insurance and things along those lines. But also for us, increasingly, it's education around ageing and around linking in as people with sickle cell disease age in our community, how we can best manage them and link them in with all of the regular health screening that someone who is ageing needs as well. And in this might include increased cancer screening that's needed for persons with sickle cell disease, for example. So it's often really appropriate in these appointments to consider how this best fits in with a patient's lifestyle. In our hospital clinics, we might have a set day and time, and that needs to be fitted in to some degree because we can't always be there everywhere for everybody at every time. But this is where we use a lot of telehealth, and that's where the pandemic has been, in some ways a blessing in disguise, and that telehealth has become much more widely available and accepted. And we often would use that, for example, for a number of our appointments, as long as we're touching base face-to-face with our patients at least once a year. So what is routine evaluation and prevention? I won't read through this list because I know you all can, but it essentially is individualised for each patient, and that's just some of the things that it might include, and it varies according to different stages of life, as we've already discussed. Some of these things involve discussion, some of them involve formal investigations. There should be a plan, and certainly we have a plan and a protocol for how often we do certain tests, depending on if they were normal or abnormal at different times, for example. And so you should be familiar as a patient with your plan, what the plan is, how often these should be done, what we're expecting to find, why are we doing these tests, and asking questions about that, and that all occurs at the general health maintenance. So then what can we do? So current in medical interventions, and I know there are a lot of other interventions that are not medical per se, but I'm focusing on the medical, really around preventing complications. So things such as vaccination and prophylactic antibiotics, and we've already heard about the fantastic benefit that early prophylactic antibiotics in paediatrics can make. Hydroxyurea, red cell exchange and red cell transfusion are other medical interventions that can make a difference. And we know, and many of us know, and there is, I know, a discussion later on today around some of the novel treatment options that are not yet available to us in Australia. Agents that can reduce or prevent sickle cell dehydration or red cell sickling, or hemoglobin F inducers, some that target the vascular disease that comes with sickle cell disease, sickle cell crises, and some antioxidant agents as well. And all of these, hopefully we'll start to see some of these across our shores in the near future. So a little bit on what we do have available. So many people are familiar with hydroxyurea, or the formal name is hydroxycarbamide, so you may see it called that. Often it's just called Hydrea, and it does reduce painful crises and has some long-term benefits, and is most information is on patients with the typical sickle cell disease, hemoglobin SS, but there are some benefits in hemoglobin sickle C and beta thal. The indications you can see there, so it's not applicable for all patients, but it is something that we strongly advocate for many of our patients. There are complications with sickle cell disease and hydroxyurea, but increased risk of cancer is not one of them. Red cell exchange or erythrocytophoresis is very effective in preventing the acute and chronic complications of sickle cell disease, and is offered at various centres, but not to everybody, to really patients who are having complex problems with their sickle cell disease. It has the advantage of the red cell transfusion in replacing the sickle cell red cells with normal red cells or typical red cells, but without the problems of iron overload that you get with standard transfusion. What are the criteria? And you can see there both acute and chronic, but it's not a program that we go into lightly because it requires long-term what we call vascular access, so ability to access veins, and often needs a device to do that, for example. But it certainly is extremely useful both in the acute and chronic situation for patients with sickle cell disease. Probably one of the most important things we do is pain management, and we've already touched on with the previous speaker about plans for pain management. It's really important to understand and have a pain management plan both for the chronic pain and acute pain. What to do in a crisis, when to escalate, how to escalate, what have I got at home, when should I come into hospital, who should I call, when should I call them. All of that is super important, and it really is very important to have a regular review of the pain plan and updating of the pain plan to make sure that it always and still meets the ongoing needs of each individual patient. It's also important to know what to do when there is an acute event, and acute events can be many and varied, but pain crisis would be most common. So it's important to recognise precipitants and avoid these, commonly dehydration, intercurrent infection, for example, and what to do when these occur early, so manage and recognise early warning signs to try and head off the more severe complications with a crisis. Also important to have management plans in the emergency department. So this is not the patient's responsibility by any means, but as us as doctors, educating our emergency department physicians around sickle cell disease, what to do but having alert cards, and our patients carry an alert card, so they do go to a hospital which is not their home hospital, where they're not known. They have an alert card as to the immediate precautions, what to do, and who to call for further advice. So what are the potentially curative options? So right now we have allogeneic bone marrow transplantation, and again there's some further information later today on this. So it's ideally done at a younger age, before patients with sickle cell disease have the long-term complications, and particularly organ damage. So patients who have complications with chronic pain, for example, are not always fixed by bone marrow transplant. However, it does work very much by replacing the sickle bone marrow with a typical hemoglobin A bone marrow and red cells, and reduce ongoing complications with sickle cell disease. Gene therapy, and I know there are also discussions on this later today, but to introduce the concept, is around fixing the genetic mutation. So essentially replacing that amino acid abnormality in the sickle cell gene, and replacing that with a normal hemoglobin or a typical hemoglobin. This is still considered largely experimental. We're certainly running therapy similarly in other diseases in Australia, and we have a program at Royal Melbourne we're running with a number of other, particularly something called Fabry disease and Gaucher disease as well. And I know beta thalassemia has been run in Australia as well. But we know certainly of this is a very exciting and potential option for many patients in the future, and has been overseas in trials. So what does the future look like for sickle cell disease in Australia? I think pleasingly we're seeing increasing awareness, increasing profile, and in large part that's due to the work done by Agnes and ASCA. But also we're seeing increasing patient numbers. We're seeing that we're working very hard towards local guidelines with the Sickle Cell Australia Working Group, and we also have increased patient advocacy and support, which is really important, not just with ASCA but TASCA, and also Rare Diseases Australia, which are very, Rare Diseases of Australia are very, very good with their knowledge of government and policy. So it's certainly our hope to have a lot of the novel therapies available to many of our patients and to our team members. But it's equally important, I think, something that we can all do now is to really focus on the optimisation of what are the currently available options for patients with sickle cell disease in Australia, and that optimisation of sickle cell plans, optimisation of their healthcare maintenance is really what we can and should focus on right now as it's available as we speak. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kylie. Really, really informative. Do we have any questions for Dr. Kylie? Any questions? I have one. You were talking about cancer screening in your presentation. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that? Why, and what are some of the things that you're kind of looking out for? Thanks.
So unfortunately, patients or people with sickle cell disease are at increased risk of cancers, or we're all at risk of cancer. 1 in 2 of us will get cancer, just everyone out there walking on Pitt Street's at that risk as we age. Unfortunately, heart disease and cancer are the things that unfortunately result in the demise of the majority of Australians. But for people with sickle cell disease, they are at increased risk. And so for us, it's ensuring, first of all, that they undergo their regular cancer screening. So things like the bowel, the breast, the prostate, all of the common cancer screenings that often get missed in the milieu and the mix of all the other things that are going on for a patient with sickle cell disease. It's often this sort of, they get put to the back burner, whereas in fact they're really important. But it's also around the regular screening programs, regular health maintenance. We don't tend to do routine scans, for example, but it's about having regular physical examination, health checks, skin checks, for example, as well, in Australia, particularly important. And doing also checks on urine and bowel screening are the main things we focus on. But all combined, it's very individualised depending on who the patient is, what their family history and their personal risk is. Yes?
Doctor, do you have a recommendation on what age group we're looking at?
So again, we start, being an adult hospital, we inherit patients at the age of 18, and we start this discussion not at their first visit usually because there's so much else going on, but fairly early after that, for boys around testicular self-examination, for young women it's starting to get familiar with breast self-examination. It's not the main focus of any of our visits, but we start from a very young age. Again, it's about, and as we've been talking about already, it's about introducing everything gradually from a younger age. So start transition from 13 and up, start talking about problems that may occur when people are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, when they're younger, so that it's not something new we're trying to introduce later on. But it's not a big focus for the 18-year-old coming in, but it is something that we start to introduce, particularly when they're going from sort of 21, 25 age group, when they're university educational and they're steady in their work. It's often a good time to start to talk about those things.
I think we're done. So thank you very much, Dr. Kylie. Appreciate it. Okay. Good morning, everyone. That was a great presentation. It's been a wonderful morning so far, and our break is near. But before we do that, I will be introducing Dr Akshat Jain. He's our specialist today who will be talking about sickle cell trait and why it is important to discuss it. By way of introduction, Dr Akshat Jain is the Director of Inherited Bleeding Disorders and Sickle Cell Hemoglobinopathies Program. He is a member of the Faculty Department of Pediatrics and Clinical Medicine. He is a Professor of Pediatric Hematology Oncology at the Loma Linda University School of Medicine and the Loma Linda University Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, California. Welcome, Dr. Akshat. And before I let Dr. Akshat speak, I will also take the opportunity to introduce myself. I am Natalie Kapuya and part of ASCA. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me. Please give me a shout out if you can. Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you, ASCA and Agnes, who continues to impress and inspire me with the work that she's doing, with the passion, what she's doing, and everybody that is here to not only learn, but also support the cause of sickle cell disease. As somebody who was born in India, born and raised in India, did his med school in Africa, and has been practicing medicine now in the United States for the past 15 years. I can speak to my very close personal connections and passion for people with red blood cell disorders, which happen to be, have touched me very closely and have impacted my career and my research focus over these past 20 plus years in the field of medicine. I am honored to be presenting to you with the not so fancy topic, but yet very extremely important and something close to my heart, which is sickle cell trait, and why is it still relevant in 2022, and why we should still continue to have the discussion of sickle cell disease at this conference and everywhere else at every opportunity. This is a slide showing my conflict of interest. I have no relevant conflict of interest to be disclosed for this talk. When I was deciding to speak about sickle cell trait, which I often do to the local support healthcare groups that we have for sickle cell disease in our region in Southern California in the United States, and with patients and families at every single opportunity, these are things that have always come in conversations about talking to people with sickle cell disease and sickle cell trait. Children, 300 plus families are under our direct care in my sickle cell program, Center of Excellence. But every single person that walks in with that child with sickle cell disease and that young adult with sickle cell disease has sickle cell trait, and has brought an opportunity for us, or always provides an opportunity for counseling and discussing sickle cell trait, because many are times due to lack of education, even in a developed country like in the United States, the deer in the headlight look, which I get from families who aren't aware of how the trait propagates through the genetic pedigree, it always provides an opportunity to talk about sickle cell trait and why it's important to know about sickle cell trait and the health issues that it brings along with it. So these are the topics that these are the subheadings that we will be discussing today in the next 20 plus some slides over the next 20 minutes. Starting with the history, the human evolution and sickle cell trait, and how we have come a long way since James Herrick in 1910, who first identified abnormal red blood cell population in a patient suffering from severe pain and anemia, to Linus Pauling getting the Nobel Prize for the first time molecularly identifying the disease at a molecular level, and to today, where we have extremely sophisticated technologies to identify not just sickle cell disease subtypes, but even genotypes and understand the implications of the gene and genotypes with the phenotypic expression, which is the disease presentation. We have come a long way. The global distribution of sickle cell gene still affects about 300,000 babies born every year. And this is understatement to say the least, given the fact that most countries don't have active registries where actual incidence and prevalence of disease is recorded. It is estimated, though, that by 2050, which is 2 decades away, about 30% increase from this existing number is going to be a drastic impact of sickle cell disease and expansion across the world. The picture to your left demonstrates the population incidence and population pyramid and the epidemiologic distribution and representation of the distribution of sickle cell genome across the world on a world map. And as you can see, India and Africa are rightfully represented disproportionately due to the presence of sickle cell disease in these countries, as was iterated by the previous speakers. Another image just demonstrating the prevalence of newborns or incidence of newborns with sickle cell disease born as of 2015, a New England Journal paper, just demonstrating the presence of this genetic disease that has used to be focused in 1 or 2 continents is now having a global footprint, truly making this disease a disease of global importance, and devotes the health equity attention as a global community. Another picture from the Lancet Journal demonstrating in the top picture the data points or prevalence of the hemoglobin S gene distribution across the world. The points in blue are areas where the sickle cell genotype was found to be less pronounced versus the red points on demonstrating the heavy presence of sickle cell genotype in these regions. And that brings us to one very important historical concept of why the persistence of sickle cell trait in these particular regions versus having an incidence or a global footprint that affects every country proportionately, and that has to do with malaria. I'm sure many in the room here in the audience are aware of that connection with malaria and sickle cell. The malarial parasites needs oxygen to thrive, and people who have sickle cell trait and or disease doesn't provide that luxury to the malarial parasite. And historically, over the past 10,000, 15,000 years of human evolution, it has happened that the parasite has found its way to survive in people with the sickle cell trait, and has led to the perishing of people who had the disease from malaria. This is what I do as a hematologist every single day, looking under the microscope, peripheral smears. This is what sickle cell disease of a person with sickle cell blood shows, and The idea of showing this picture here is not to train somebody in hematology, but just to demonstrate that oftentimes people forget that people with sickle cell trait do also walk around with about 20 to 30+% of their hemoglobin concentration being the sickle cell type. There is a disproportionately high balanced hemoglobin in a person with sickle cell trait, so they may not be symptomatic as pronounced in people with sickle cell disease, but that goes without saying. It does lead to the important conclusion that biologically you still are walking with a disproportionate disadvantage of having about 30 to 40% of your blood cells not having optimum working red blood cells to be able to carry oxygen, and in extreme circumstances that becomes very important. Not to belabor the sickle cell disease pathophysiology and mechanisms of how it affects the human body, I think the speaker before me covered it beautifully. So I'm going to browse over this slide, which demonstrates the mechanism of pathophysiologic changes in sickle cell disease and sickle cell trait. The special health issues in people with sickle cell trait that stem from these pathophysiologic abnormalities of ischemia, inflammation, and the downstream effects of these two major mechanisms in sickle cell disease and people with sickle cell trait lead to organ dysfunction. As you could imagine, not having enough oxygen going to these end organs that are highly vascular and require oxygen for its effective functioning. When that effect is felt in the kidneys, hematuria, which is blood in the urine, is a presenting symptom and has been found to be associated with people with sickle cell trait. Spleen infarction, or spleen, the organ that helps to build our defense mechanisms against some particular bacteria that could be life-threatening, presents with pain and swelling on the left side of the upper abdomen, and could mimic a severe pain crisis, as akin to what is seen in some people with sickle cell disease as a splenic sequestration. Blood clots, because of hyperviscosity or thickened blood, or ability for the red blood cells to be very sticky because of oxygen-free radicals, hyperinflammation, and inflammatory coagulopathy, which is the underlying mechanism in sickle cell, can sometimes present as deep venous thrombosis or clots in the legs, or pulmonary embolism, which is clots in the lungs. Renal medullary carcinoma, which I'm going to discuss a little bit more in the slides to come. Chronic kidney disease because of repeated insult or absence of oxygen leading to insult, ischemic insult, and damage to the kidney tissues lead to chronic kidney disease, which manifests as loss of protein in the urine, hypertension or blood pressure issues very early on in life. And an identified but not very well publicized issue of sudden death or exertional complications of severe exertion and dehydration, which I'll show by the means of a few examples of how this was identified to be a very powerful health feature of health impact. And asymptomatic bacteriuria, which is irritation or a presence of bacterial colonization in females. These are particular issues that have been identified over and over again in people with sickle cell trait and need special attention. Sickle cell in the kidneys. Kidneys are organs that are extremely vascular, meaning having a lot of blood vessels and requiring a lot of oxygen because the amount of filtration or clearing your blood of damaging or disintegrated blood products that needed to be cleaned out requires a high efficiency of oxygen delivery. And in sickle cell trait, renal papillary necrosis, which is a well-known condition of irregularly round or oval areas of damage to the kidney, especially in the papilla or the areas of the kidneys that are highly vascular, is a very discrete and a unique presentation in sickle cell people with sickle cell trait, and has been identified as a major health issue for people with sickle cell trait. Sudden cardiac death, a well-known association with people with sickle cell trait, and have been time and again identified in military recruits and in athletes during extreme exercise or physical endurance testing has its roots in the basic vascular dysfunction that comes with hemolysis, that starts with the breakdown of the sickle cells or cells, red blood cells that have sickle cell hemoglobin in it, leading to free hemoglobin or free heme release into the circulation that acts as this potent mechanism to shrink the blood vessels or constrict the blood vessels, leading to downstream changes and damages into the pulmonary or blood vessels supplying to the lungs, and thereby then causing more pressure and dysfunction to the heart, which has to work harder over the time and over many years and decades to be able to compensate for that lack of oxygen, thereby leading to a decompensated cardiac output or decompensated cardiac function, remarked by diastolic left heart function, thickening of the heart and cardiomyopathy, and electrocardiographic changes, meaning the triggers that cause or that stimulate and coordinate our heart to beat, to be able to pump blood to the oxygen, due to chronic damage to these heart muscle tissues, lead to rhythm changes causing arrhythmias and sudden cardiac death. These are active and hot areas that are being studied, and certainly something that I do in my sickle cell trait program, which I'll be talking to you about in a few slides. What happens during an extreme situation of physical activity and or extremes of temperatures and dehydration is a complex interplay of muscle breakdown in people with sickle cell trait, and those muscle breakdown products as a result causing the shutdown of the kidneys, and then catastrophic events that leads to exercise associated sudden death. So a multitude of factors involving the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, and the muscles play a complex interplay of pathophysiologic changes in people with sickle cell trait. And in this 2009 paper in the New England Journal, it was estimated that a person with sickle cell trait is about 200 times higher the risk of rhabdomyolysis, which is breakdown of the muscles causing sudden cardiac death, as compared to somebody who does not have sickle cell trait. Just to build up on what was said in the presentation just before me and the question from the audience, renal medullary carcinoma, an exclusive cancer of the kidneys, which is an aggressive tumor, is almost exclusively seen in people with sickle cell disease and or sickle cell trait. It's an intriguing, damaging, malignant, highly aggressive cancer that affects the medullary part of the kidneys, and the picture on the right demonstrates a CT scan image of a patient having this massive enlargement of this tissue that is the kidney, causing it to have in a patient with sickle cell trait presenting as cancer, which usually starts as a clinical presentation of simple blood in the urine or painless hematuria, meaning having obtained blood without having any pain or discomfort, but can aggressively move on or propagate itself as a malignant cancer, and has a historical deep-rooted association with sickle cell trait, mechanisms of which is still not very clearly understood. So as a general awareness point with people with sickle cell trait, you cannot go wrong if you keep yourself hydrated, and I'm really happy that the presenters are making sure everybody is hydrated and are reminded of hydration here at the meeting today. Preventing high altitudes and areas where there is lower concentration of oxygen, as is the body suffers from a decompensated state of having inability to carry oxygen to these highly vascular tissues of the human body, and getting to an environment such as super high altitudes or deep sea diving or areas that are lower in oxygen concentration, or when it's difficult to extract oxygen out of your surrounding environment, makes for the perfect storm in somebody with sickle cell trait. Moving on to the third aspect of our talk today, and understanding the real life impact. Why do we need to talk about sickle cell trait? Why is it still relevant in 2022, where genetic counseling and genotypic analysis, all of that is easily available? And in many countries, the newborn screening program studies and reports out sickle cell trait genotype. I'm sorry. And I'm going to show you this by some examples that have impacted people with sickle cell trait in the real world. Extrapolating from what we have seen in the United States over the past 50, 60, 70 years, and what has been published as establishing pioneering work in people with sickle cell trait and military service, I want to drive your attention to this important point that the United States military identified sickle cell trait as an adversely affecting health issue in military recruits as early as 1970s. Yet only the United States Army has just utilized screening of sickle cell trait in recruits not very long ago, basically about 3 or 4 years ago. So there has been this long presence of information that we've had, but a lag in implementation of guidelines by utilizing this information. So this study that was done and published in 1990, where sudden unexplained death during training was observed in people in military service, and it was found that it disproportionately affected people with sickle cell trait. The conclusion, or one of the remarks in this paper in 1990 was, and in the view of requirements for military divers, especially in the Navy, obviously, to operate in cold weather under stressful situations, not just the weather, but also oxygen concentration issues, it was justified that people with sickle cell trait be removed or not included in the military service. We've come a long way since that paper in 1990, but it just behooves of us to take notice, and especially in a country which is still debating whether to include sickle cell screening as part of newborn screening program, just to understand how impactful it is for people with sickle cell trait to be included in this cohort as well. A paper in 1987, which is shown as a picture, as the cartoon in the bottom, looked at sickle cell trait as a risk factor for sudden cardiac death in physical training. About 2 million enlisted recruits between 1977 and 1981 were classified from autopsy and clinical records of which were reviewed, and it was found that recruits in basic training with sickle cell trait had a substantially high age-dependent risk of exercise-related sudden death, and at that time reported as an unexplained cause of death. This is what I call as the real-world gut punch. This is something that we have known for years. A study out of Fort Bliss, Texas, which is a military base, in the 1970s, had already concluded that people with sickle cell trait had 30 times were more likely to die during the first few days of endurance training, of basic training for newly recruits that were sickle cell trait. The first athlete death was reported in the 1974 from sickle cell trait. And yet for many college football players and recruits across the country have had sudden cardiac death or sudden death on the field during training with people and found to have sickle cell trait. If COVID-19 taught us something, it was to identify high-risk population. And I had the good fortune of talking with some of your colleagues a few years ago in the middle of the pandemic about the impact of COVID-19 and sickle cell disease. And just to reiterate, even at that point, I had mentioned that people with sickle cell trait were also found in the preliminary analysis of what we did as a global sickle cell consortium study to be associated with high risk of both pulmonary outcomes and hospitalizations as two endpoints that were studied in COVID-19 and sickle cell disease as adverse outcomes. So it wasn't just sickle cell disease, it was sickle cell trait. And as we now know, hypoxemia and coagulation or clot formation or microclot formation in the lungs led to the damage that led to these patients getting an adverse outcome. It ties in very closely to how sickle cell disease affects people. So the conclusion was that sickle cell trait is not so benign when it comes to COVID-19. what has the real world impact on sickle cell been on careers? I did discuss with the studies done on military recruits, but this study, as early as early last year, which looked at Air Force recruits, looked and reviewed about 180,000 civilians that entered in the United States Air Force in a 5-year surveillance period. It was found that people with sickle cell trait were less likely to be promoted to staff sergeant within 4 years, and spent less time at high elevation location during the first 6 years of service, certainly putting them at a disadvantage of academic progress or professional progress. And the retention, not surprisingly, at 4 and 6 years in the United States Air Force recruits was inversely associated with their hemoglobin S percentage. This was a powerful, eye-opening study that demonstrated that sickle cell trait is not that benign, and this discussion needs to be continued. Impacts on sports and education is real. We see that in the United States all the time. I fill out these forms for my teenage patients and adolescent patients who are athletes who hope to get scholarships into colleges due to sports. And I always use the University of Alabama sickle cell trait health equity study as the leading hallmark of my recommendations and guidelines. Just to briefly summarize what the study had shown, it had studied about 379 athletes who were on scholarship out of the total 604 that were included, and 140, which is approximately 1/4 or a little over 1/4 of those athletes were of African American descent. It was found that about the startup cost of targeted testing for sickle cell trait for any African American recruit at the University of Alabama was about $4,500. The continued cost for health screening for these people with African American recruits was about $1,000 per recruit, or $1,000 per student per year, and that just emphasizes the point of putting a cost or a label. It just emphasizes the importance of, in terms of the big picture and the long-term cost-benefit analysis. This is a small price to pay if you are to avoid or have health equity or discussions of health equity and having representation for all subsegments of the population, and have an equal opportunity for everybody to be able to participate and safely have a career, have and maintain careers. Genetic counseling will be discussed by subsequent speakers, so I will limit my discussion with importance of sickle cell trait and genetic counseling with this picture that I'm sure almost everybody in this room has been this information that everybody is likely aware of the transmission of sickle cell trait and sickle cell genetic pedigree during families. There is a 25% chance that a person with sickle cell trait having a child with another person with sickle cell trait will end up with a child with sickle cell disease, and about a 50% chance that there will probability that there will be a child that will be a carrier of sickle cell disease and have these health issues and implications that I have discussed in the past few slides. Moving forward, what do we do with this information? How do we bring this information to practice? I would like to demonstrate this with something that we have accomplished at our program. So my sickle cell trait program in Southern California that started about a year and a half ago has now an active database of about 150 patients. And looking at the number of people that we have in our community, that is not a big number by any means. But the idea of creating a comprehensive program, very similar to having a transition program from pediatric to adulthood, we have to think about investing in people with sickle cell trait so that we can avoid adverse outcomes, not only on the military, in the military recruit stage, or on the field, or in during extreme heat situations, but also to prevent people to end up having children with sickle cell disease, which is, as we all have been sensitized, is an outcome that nobody deserves to have. what we did is negotiated to create a dedicated clinic space.
If I may, Dr. Akshat.
Yes.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Unfortunately, we just have to abide to our time rules because we do have some other presenters coming after you. Do you think we could wrap up?
This is probably my last slide, and just to demonstrate the importance
in the room
of
and
the
then
cell
quickly
trait
move
program.
on. So if you may continue for.
So in the interest of time, the last few slides were just a demonstration of how we've done and created a successful sickle cell trait program. But I think I've made my point, and I think I'll open the session to any questions, and I'm open to replying to questions post-meeting via email as well. Happy to be here, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions in the room for Dr. Akshat? Maybe I'll just make a very quick remark. Yes, Dr. Jain has a question.
Well, it's not a question, it's more of a statement and a cautionary tale for non-clinicians in the room that I think what has been presented is not, and no disrespect, is not really the consensus of opinion amongst most clinicians and haematologists. I think it's important, and I'll read to you the ASCA position statement about sudden death and preventing people from participating in exercise programs and the like. This is from 2021 from ASCA, and it says, because of the rarity of sudden death in persons with sickle cell trait, courses where this is cited as the sole cause of death, a major contributor must be viewed with profound scepticism. So I think it's just very important to put this into context, and it doesn't really represent the balance of opinion of most of the clinicians, and I think everybody sitting around this table here would echo that with me. Look, sorry to be controversial, but I think it's important to put this into perspective.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jain, for that remark. I think from our point as ASCA, we certainly also welcome discussions around more awareness and focus on sickle cell trait. And I think this all goes to just having general awareness about sickle cell disease and what causes it. So
I just want to add that, it's also about not creating anxiety where there doesn't need to be anxiety.
Absolutely. I suppose it's a balance, and I think it probably provides an opportunity to have another discussion, hopefully at another time, with Dr. Akshat Jain and our wonderful doctors in the room, and to appease everyone and certainly not cause anxiety, as we've mentioned. Just one statistic that I read yesterday, which was pretty staggering to me, was that 16% of people who carry the sickle cell trait in the world are aware that they have the trait. So it certainly calls to more education, more awareness for people to understand what it means to have the sickle cell trait and what it leads to. As we've already mentioned, 300,000 babies born every year with sickle cell disease. So it's definitely not competing on between a sickle cell trait and sickle cell disease, but the two are certainly linked together. Thank you very much, Dr. Akshat. And one question from Agnes.
Thank you so much for that. Dr. Akshat, thank you so much, and Dr. Butler, thank you so much. The sickle cell trait is something that's very close to my heart, as the other, most important topics in sickle cell. I've discussed this several times, and I think part of the reasons why I went into advocacy was because of what happened to me when I was pregnant. Dr. Women knows that. I almost died. I was a pretty much sickle cell patient at the time. I had all the symptoms. And so for me, sickle cell trait is something that we should really even focus more than, hand in hand with sickle cell disease. And this is why this is a very important topic for this conference as well. So thank you so much. That's just one.
Another comment.
Yeah, if I may, just to address the comments, being a global physician, somebody who travels and helps run sickle cell programs around the world, consensus usually takes time to build. I have no doubt in my mind that this August panel will have a change of heart and mind in 5 years or 10 years, but seeing things on ground and having representation, and rightfully providing evidence-based guidelines is what I attempted, and is demonstrated here in terms of the available literature, and rightfully so, the guidance that people who are listening here with sickle cell trait who need to be aware, not alarmed, but be aware that there are health implications of sickle cell trait. We saw that with COVID-19, and we do continue to see that in extreme situations, as evidenced by thousands of recruits that were studied in the military and continue to be studied in the sports field. Thank you very much.
Okay, one final comment, and
sorry, I think you already answered my question there, Doctor, about around the awareness and giving the opportunity for those that are aware with sickle cell traits to make informed decisions. So I think that is probably more important in the community for us to recognise that we do have the trait and to follow that up with caution. That's all. Thanks.
okay, thank you. So as I called earlier, certainly more awareness and less anxiety. So I'm sure that we'll get Agnes and ASCA to make sure that we do have a session on this one in the near future. Thank you. And with that, I will invite Mayase.
We're almost there, people, to our first break. We're almost there. So while we get Dr. Pat McGann ready, how about we all stand up? People who are online, people who are in the room, just stand up. 1 minute. Stand up, stand up. We've been sitting for like 2 hours. A bit of a stretch to the right, to the left, to the back, to the front. All right, great, great, awesome. All right, I'd like to introduce Dr. Pat McGann as our next presenter. He is the pediatric and adult sickle cell hematology, I can't pronounce this, hemoglobinopathy program at Rhode Island Hospital and Hasbro Children's Hospital. And he is going to be talking to us about hydroxyurea in sickle cell disease. Dr. McGann.
Hi, good morning. I can't keep the time change. I know it's in the evening here now. I believe it's morning there now, but I'm sorry to be in between you and your break, but I hope to share a little bit of information about hydroxyurea in the next 15 minutes or so. Oops. There we are. You guys can see my slides, right? I can see them moving. Okay. So the first question is about why should you treat sickle cell disease? As was described earlier, there are many people with sickle cell disease who don't seem to have many outside overt manifestations or symptoms. And should we just wait for symptoms? Well, I think pretty clearly at this point, the answer is probably no. We know that there are a lot of outside symptoms like pain and acute chest syndrome and other things, but there are also many internal organ damage problems that happen starting very early in life for those with the most severe forms of sickle cell disease, SS disease, which is the most common type of sickle cell disease in the world. And we know that without treatment, sickle cell disease affects your kidneys and heart and lungs and spleen and base brain and every organ in your body. And we have a really effective treatment now, and I think, as you'll hopefully be convinced by the end of this talk, we really ought to treat everyone really without reservation. We shouldn't wait for bad things to happen before treating. So just a little bit of a history before hydroxyurea. So we're really lucky now to have hydroxyurea. Sickle cell disease was discovered first over 100 years ago in 1910, and they really, likely because of the lack of research interest in sickle cell disease because of the population that it affects. There was stagnation in research progress and treatment, and there really were no treatments until hydroxyurea. All there really was blood transfusions for acute events, penicillin, antibiotics to prevent infection. Folic acid is often administered, which there's really not a whole lot of evidence to show what it truly does, but there was nothing until hydroxyurea. So we're really excited that there finally was something almost 100 years after finding out about sickle cell disease. There was a little bit of a discussion earlier about fetal hemoglobin, and not to belabor too much the details or the science here, but fetal hemoglobin is the type of hemoglobin that fetuses have. It binds oxygen more tightly and allows fetuses to basically steal some oxygen from the maternal circulation. Fetal hemoglobin also is very effective at preventing sickling of red blood cells and polymerization of sickle hemoglobin. And so babies, when they're born, they have 80 or 90% sickle hemoglobin, and even if they have sickle cell disease, they only have 10 or 20% hemoglobin S, or the sickle hemoglobin. And that fetal hemoglobin protects these babies against symptoms, and babies really don't have symptoms of sickle cell disease until at least 6 or 9 months of age, or for some much later when that hemoglobin switch happens. That's how we describe it, is the hemoglobin switch, where the fetal hemoglobin basically turns off, and the adult form of hemoglobin, or the after birth form of hemoglobin, begins to occur. And that for many people is hemoglobin A, which is the normal form of hemoglobin, but for individuals with sickle cell disease, it's hemoglobin S. There are also some people who hereditarily have persistence of fetal hemoglobin. They have genetic mutations that result in fetal hemoglobin being super high for a long period of time throughout their life. And those patients, even though they have only hemoglobin S, have enough fetal hemoglobin that they basically have no symptoms. And so we've known for a long time that fetal hemoglobin is a great target, and kind of serendipitously, hydroxyurea was found to do that. So hydroxyurea is a really, really old medicine, and unfortunately the thing that it was used to treat initially was cancer, and so it is a chemotherapy agent. We'll get to that by definition, and really has been affected negatively from that association for a long time. But it was found in the 1980s, kind of, again, serendipitously, to induce fetal hemoglobin. And this led to a lot of interest in sickle cell disease because we know that fetal hemoglobin is important to prevent symptoms. In the early studies, we're very, very careful. These were done in the early 1980s, mid-1980s and 1990s. And they were very careful because this, by definition, again, was a chemotherapy medication. And we don't want to cause damage or give toxic medications if we don't have to. And so at first, very, very sick adult patients with sickle cell disease were included in these trials. And it was very effective. It reduced pain, it reduced acute chest syndrome, it reduced transfusions. Studies continued, and it reduced mortality. And it basically has shown now over 35 years of research to basically improve virtually all sickle cell symptoms for most patients who take it. In the US, it was the first FDA-approved drug for sickle cell disease. This happened in 1998. Just because it takes forever to approve medications in children, it didn't get approved in children until 2017. Subsequently, it was approved in Europe around somewhere in between that time frame, but it was the first approved medicine in many countries for sickle cell disease. The treatment response on the right are blood smears. You saw blood smear earlier. At the top is sickle cell disease untreated, and at the bottom is sickle cell disease treated. You don't really need to be a hematologist or a doctor or any sort of medical person to see that picture at the bottom looks pretty much better than the one at the top. There aren't those sickled cells. There's just more red blood cells in general, and that picture really says 1,000 words, and it is associated with increased or improved symptoms. We know that it makes hemoglobin go higher, it makes fetal hemoglobin go higher, it makes the size of your red blood cells bigger. It reduces all of the lab values that are too high in sickle cell disease for bad reasons, reticulocyte count, white blood cell count, neutrophils, etc. And it's been shown over time to reduce pain, acute chest, stroke risk, transfusion, improve mortality. Recent data showing that it protects the heart over the long term. It protects neurocognitive function. Really, the more experience we have and the more studies that are done, the more evidence we have that this is truly a good medicine. It's important to recognize that this has been a work in progress for 35 years. It first started as a chemotherapy medicine that people were afraid of, and it was experimental and people were worried about it. And many adult patients now first heard about hydroxyurea in those early days when it was considered experimental chemotherapy medicine. And it's hard to change that mindset. But over time, you see this time frame here. First, it was just experimental, and then it was pretty effective, and they were using it in sick adults, and they started to use it in children a little bit more. But they wouldn't want to use it in young children because, again, it's chemotherapy medicine, and they weren't really sure. There was a study called Baby Hug, which was a randomized study. It gave little babies aged 9 to 18 months of age either hydroxyurea or placebo. And that study showed that those who got hydroxyurea had fewer pain crises and hospitalization and transfusions and all these things. And that study was really transformative and led us to realize that this medicine works, and it really should be used for everyone. We shouldn't wait for bad things to happen, and we should just use it in all patients. In the US, we have guidelines from our National Institutes of Health that recommend offering hydroxyurea starting at 9 months of age, really based on the data from Baby Hug. My clinical practice, so you probably aren't going to find someone who's more of a proponent or advocate of hydroxyurea than me. I think anybody who has sickle cell anemia, and when I say sickle cell anemia, I mean hemoglobin SS or S beta 0 thalassemia mostly. I started right away. I talk about hydroxyurea at the first visit when I see these babies after newborn screening, and really aim to start it before there are problems. Some patients don't have problems for a year or two. Some have problems starting at 6 months, and these problems can be life-threatening. And I can't predict who's going to have which problems. And so I am very clear to prevent problems for everyone and just keep everyone at a level playing field of having high fetal hemoglobin on treatment and really trying to keep them out of the hospital and preventing really bad things from happening. Dosing is incredibly important, and I think it's probably the reason why many people say that hydroxyurea doesn't work or doesn't work for them. I think that the dose is probably not appropriate for them, and we'll talk a little bit about dosing here. And medication adherence. So dosing and adherence are really the two things that limit hydroxyurea effectiveness. You have to give the right dose, and then the patient has to actually take the medicine every day. And so I talk about adherence at every time I see a patient and discuss with them openly and hopefully transparently about how their adherence is and what we can do to make it better. And we have a lot of new therapies out there. There's voxelotor or Oxbryta, there's crizanlizumab or Adakveo, among others that are on the horizon. And these medicines probably have some role in the treatment of sickle cell disease, but there's no question that hydroxyurea has to be the baseline, the foundational treatment ahead of these therapies. It is way better studied and more effective for lots of reasons than these other medicines. So even though these new medicines are appealing and new and exciting for some people, old-fashioned hydroxyurea really should be the foundation, and these other medicines can be added as needed with time. So is there anybody who shouldn't get hydroxyurea? Well, maybe some. If a patient has had an actual stroke, an overt stroke, we know that there was a study called SWITCH that tried to compare hydroxyurea to transfusions, and it wasn't super clear. There was issues around iron chelation that limited the results, but we think transfusions are probably better in the long term. And so chronic transfusions, if someone's had a stroke, is probably favored. If you're in a part of the world where chronic transfusions are not practical or available, then sure, hydroxyurea is better than nothing by far. So if chronic blood transfusions are available, if someone's had a stroke or significant vasculopathy, moya disease or something like that, then they should get blood transfusion. If someone's had an abnormal TCD velocities, the recommendations are to give blood transfusions for 1 year. And hopefully if they normalize, you can transition them back to hydroxyurea off transfusions. Pregnancy, I have a slide about that later. We don't really know for sure, but in general, everyone's a good candidate. I think I said in the last slide, other genotypes, so hemoglobin SC or S beta plus thalassemia or other uncommon sickle cell genotypes, I really base symptoms, use symptoms to decide whether or not to use hydroxyurea therapy. So dosing is incredibly important and really needs to be paid attention to. Dosing is, in my opinion, pretty conservative and wimpy in most cases, and I think we can do better. And we know that more hydroxyurea, it results in better benefits. So it's a once daily medicine. It's taken by mouth. In the US, at least, we have liquid compounded versions. There are 500 milligram capsules that are the most common form around the world. I'm not sure what's available in Australia. There's another version that's available widely in Europe called Sickle, that is a dissolvable tablet that is 1,000 milligrams that can be scored into 250 milligram pieces. The starting dose historically really was 15 to 20 milligrams per kilogram per day. I write here 20 to 25, but I start higher. I start at 25 for most of my patients, most of my pediatric patients at least, because it's well tolerated and it avoids a lot of the dose escalation that takes so much time and effort. And most patients need doses that are in the 25 to 30 milligram per kilogram per day range. We base dose escalation and dose decisions around blood counts. So we'll repeat blood counts every 1 or 3 months, sort of depending on how the patient is available to come back. And really you don't want to push them, like if you're treating someone with cancer, chemotherapy or these agents are used to drive blood counts basically to zero. We don't want to do that. We don't want to make anything unsafe. But we do drive the blood counts down a little bit to induce mild cytopenias. My really goal neutrophil count is between 1 and 2,000, as long as there's no evidence of reticulocytopenia or thrombocytopenia. And then we escalate the dose until what we call typically the maximum tolerated dose or optimal dose. And I really don't, every visit I'm evaluating the dose, and as young children grow, gain weight, the dose is adjusted to make sure that dose is optimized throughout their life, because that's really going to be a limiting factor in how well it works. Medication adherence is huge, and there's many factors around medication adherence that are important to think about. Hydroxyurea works, but you have to take it, and it takes a few months to have it work. And so whenever I start hydroxyurea new, especially in a patient who's having a lot of symptoms, I'll explain to them that it's going to take a few months until the medication has its effect. So basically every day someone takes hydroxyurea, they're making healthy hydroxyurea red blood cells. And those red blood cells are going to live for probably not the normal lifespan of red blood cells, but a few months. And so it'll take a few months, 2 to 3 months, till all of your red blood cells are healthy. And when you're not taking hydroxyurea, you're making many, many more sickled cells and slowing the process down. There's a lot of question about people who are non-responders to hydroxyurea. And I honestly think that this is really not a phenomenon. I think that it's either that the dose is not appropriate or that medication adherence is not perfect. Again, the benefits are best when the dose is highest. So side effects are problematic. We know that our patients use the internet to try to learn information, and I did this for a previous talk, and I did it again preparing for this talk, and unfortunately Google hasn't updated things. If you type in "does hydroxyurea" and you let Google continue the sentence, there's nothing positive. People don't say, does hydroxyurea make me have less pain? Does hydroxyurea keep me out of the hospital? Does hydroxyurea make me live longer? No, all negative things. And I think it's important to recognize that patients are going to do this investigation and to talk transparently about the things they might find. And so really, in general, there's really no side effects for most of my patients who take hydroxyurea. Most patients take it every day, and there's really not a big issue. Possible side effects, so hair loss is a big concern because it's a chemotherapy agent, and I haven't had any patients who really lost tremendous amounts of hair. I think when hair thinning or loss is on the list of things, if someone is in the shower and sort of has a strand or two of hair come out, they worry or blame it on the medicine. And it's a conversation. I think you want to recognize that this is a sensitive topic for many young men and women who are taking this medicine, and you want to build trust with them. And so trying to get them to sort of power through and see if it becomes a longer term problem. In most cases, it's not. Darkening of the nails is something that does happen. It's really darkening of the fingernails. It's a cosmetic thing. You can't do anything to make it really get better. Some of my patients don't seem to mind it, others do, but it's really a cosmetic thing. Decrease in blood counts, we talked about. This is really what we try to use hydroxyurea for. We monitor blood counts and base a dose on that. Upset stomach, any medicine really causes people to be upset stomach if you take it on an empty stomach, and so taking it with food helps. Early on, there used to be concerns about renal or hepatic toxicity, and people used to do blood counts or liver and renal function tests often. And this is really not done that much anymore, and we really don't have too many concerns about that anymore. So is hydroxyurea chemotherapy? This is a question, and the answer is yes. Any medicine that's used to treat cancer is a chemotherapy medicine. So prednisone is a chemotherapy medicine. All these new medicines that are used to treat malignancies are chemotherapy medicines. But the doses we use for sickle cell are way lower. It's once a day compared to 2 or 3 times a day at higher doses in malignancies. And there has been some evidence, there's been some concern that hydroxyurea causes cancer. And as I was happy to hear earlier from an earlier speaker, it does not. There's no evidence, even in precancerous conditions. So there are things called myeloproliferative neoplasms that are pre-cancers that hydroxyurea is a treatment for. And there's been many, many studies looking at what makes these precancerous conditions turn into cancer. And the answer has been, it's not hydroxyurea. And in sickle cell patients, there's 35 years of evidence now that sickle cell disease patients do not develop cancer because of hydroxyurea. Really, the only evidence that is in existence about cancer and hydroxyurea is when, back any medicine that's used to treat chemotherapy has to go through a lot of laboratory tests. And so they had cells that they poured, literally thousands of times of 100 to 1,000 times as much hydroxyurea that we would ever use in a patient, and they just bathed cells in this hydroxyurea for days and days and days, and some of those cells transformed into cancer cells. But this is really hard to interpret in the clinical context, and I think we have enough evidence now to suggest that hydroxyurea doesn't have adverse effects like that in humans. Does hydroxyurea cause infertility? This is another complicated question, and I think the short answer is no. There's really no clear evidence of this. There's no controlled trials. The complicating factor is that untreated sickle cell disease causes damage to organs, and so it causes damage to all of your organs, including damage to your reproductive organs. And so patients with sickle cell disease in general have lower fertility than other people. Hydroxyurea probably protects your organs, including your reproductive organs. Because we've only been using it in young people for 5 or 10 years, we don't have a long cohort to really tell us about their fertility after taking hydroxyurea throughout their life. My very, very strong suspicion, again, that's my suspicion, not based on evidence yet because we don't have it, is that hydroxyurea protects your organs and is really not going to be problematic. But it certainly does not, there's no evidence that it causes fertility, and there's some growing evidence that it protects your organs, your reproductive organs, actually. Hydroxyurea in pregnancy and lactation is still a bit controversial. It's still, there's, again, super preliminary evidence in animals. There may be some effect on fetuses if taken during pregnancy, and so the general recommendation continues to be to stop hydroxyurea if you're desiring to become pregnant or are pregnant. With lactation, there's evidence that very, very little hydroxyurea gets into the breast milk, and so breastfeeding while taking hydroxyurea is likely quite safe for the baby. We need more research in this area for sure, especially as we have a new cohort of young people who are growing up taking hydroxyurea. But right now, the general recommendation is if you're pregnant to stop hydroxyurea early. There's some consideration maybe to being able to start it by the 2nd or 3rd trimester. So really, I found that a lot of the hesitation, the concern around hydroxyurea is based on this historic notoriety, and I think having careful conversations early about hydroxyurea that are transparent, where you discuss what the problems or concerns that the patient or family has that they may have read about or heard about, and trying to discuss the evidence that we have right now. And again, this evidence is growing that the benefits of hydroxyurea are overwhelming, and really this should be a universal treatment for everyone. And as I've treated pediatric patients really starting from an early age for the last 10 years or so, these kids are healthy. They're healthy as their peers. They don't have manifestations of sickle cell disease. They have fetal hemoglobin levels of 30 or 40 or 50%. And this is a generation of children that I think we need to develop. Hydroxyurea adherence, I'll just finish up here. I don't want to take too much time. I know you're going to break, but I think talking about adherence is important. You can look at laboratory trends, things like MCV and fetal hemoglobin. Looking at blood smears is super important, and I think is a good educational tool for patients to show them sort of the positive benefits of hydroxyurea, and again, really addressing adherence at every single visit is super important, without judgment, recognizing that it's really hard to take a medicine every day, and there are reasons why people might not be able to or not take a medicine every day, and I think that having these careful conversations and transparently with patients is super important. So in conclusion, hydroxyurea is a great medicine. We really need to use it more widely. We need to be more aggressive about the dosing. Many of the fears about hydroxyurea are really not founded on any true evidence. And we really need to pay a lot of attention to hydroxyurea dosing and to medication adherence. And even though it's exciting with new therapies around, hydroxyurea really needs to be our foundational treatment for virtually all of our warriors out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McGann. I have a couple of questions. So, one of the ones that we battle with constantly is definitely perception. How do we combat that? And because, as you mentioned there is a Google effect. So that's one. How do we combat that perception, the negative perception around hydroxyurea? And the other question that I'm also interested in, if the response is, have we explored why the response can still be low, even though adherence is essentially perfect? And the other one that I want to also hear on, sorry, just
one question.
Just
two already.
One last one. You mentioned early initiation can equal to asymptomatic patients. Big to differ. So would like to hear a bit more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, so and correct me if I don't catch all the questions or respond to all the questions, but the Google effect, and I think having just transparent conversations and not trying to, I never try to bully a patient into taking a medicine. I discuss their concerns and I explain to them why it works, and most of the time, if symptoms persist and the patient or child continues to have symptoms, then the family will sort of come around eventually after having careful and very respectful conversations. And again, everyone has their own reasons why they feel one way or another, and I think we just need to deal with what their concerns are. I really have had very few patients who have, if any, who've had no response or a poor response if they're actually taking it with perfect adherence, if the dose is right. I think dosing is super important, and many times dosing is kind of, again, wimpy, I think is the word I used before, and so I think trying to escalate the dose if the effect is not good enough is important. This gets a little trickier in adult patients because adult patients have damage to their bone marrow and their kidneys that makes dosing a little trickier, but trying to make the dose as best as possible to reduce symptoms. And the last question about asymptomatic patients, and so I have young patients now who are 8 or 10 years old, 12 years old, who've been taking hydroxyurea their whole life, and they have fetal hemoglobin levels of 30 or 40 or 50%. And just as a comparison, there are gene therapy programs now that are trying to do gene therapy to quote unquote cure sickle cell disease, and their target is a fetal hemoglobin of 30%. And so far, at least, for the first 10 years of these kids' lives, we've been able to do that with hydroxyurea, and they live, again, healthy lives. They have no pain. They have their hemoglobin is high. They live, they do what they want to do in their life. So I'm pretty confident, at least in young children, that we can keep them super healthy by being careful about hydroxyurea.
One quick question. Dr. McGann, thank you very much for that talk. One question I did have was about the efficacy of hydroxyurea. So we can look at rise in hemoglobin, percentage hemoglobin F, or neutropenia. Do you have a sense of which of those is the most important in terms of long-term outcome for the patient? Because I suspect we certainly see some patients where the hemoglobin doesn't rise, but they are neutropenic, and if that's the most important target, that's probably important for the patients to know.
Yeah, neutropenia is going to be the dose limiting laboratory value. Really, if someone becomes neutropenic, and what is the definition? I won't stop or change hydroxyurea unless the neutrophil count is less than 750 or so. Otherwise, I'll try to power through. So that will limit the dose. But I really try to get the neutrophil count as good of a target as I can. I wouldn't stop escalating the dose because the patient is just feeling okay if the labs don't correlate. Previously, we used to use fetal hemoglobins of 20% as a good target, and I think now these days I'm much more happy with the fetal hemoglobin of 25 or 30%, and so hemoglobin itself is very difficult to interpret, but fetal hemoglobin is a good one. I really try to get most of my patients closer around 30%.
Thank you, Dr. Pat. All right, just a couple of adjustments to the schedule. So the 12:05, the one that was supposed to be 12:05 with Rachel, that's no longer going to run. And the 4:40, that was Melody, that's not also running. So we might claw back some time. But let's have a quick break. Before we do the quick break, can we get the people up on Zoom, please? And we have morning tea just outside. I would suggest that you don't fill up on all the morning tea because I hear lunch is also quite amazing. And that will be shortly. But let's have the people up on Zoom and let's just come in for 1 minute so we can have a photo. If you're on Zoom, if you're okay with having your camera on, could you have your camera on? And people in the room will just quickly come to the front here and we'll have our photos.
We're just mirroring the screen. We don't have a. Oh yeah. Oh yes. And I'm going to school all the time. And we're gonna. Yeah, I think we can get a good place to say chat.
Guys, everyone in the center, please. Okay, everyone gathering in the center. Fill in that space there at the front as well. Just the people on the sides, just fill in that space. I just want everyone to kind of be directly, because what I'm going to capture as well is the two projector screens. Sorry guys, just on that side. Beautiful. At the back there on the left side, both of the guys there, can I get you guys to come to the front? Like just kind of crouch down. You don't need to use him. You're a giant. That's it. Awesome, guys. Alright, looking over here, nice big smiles. Just like that. 1, 2, and 3. And take one more. Alright, guys. Again, looking over here, nice big smiles. 1, 2, 3. On the last one, I want everyone just to give me some energy. We're about to go on a coffee break. Everyone just put your hands up in the air and just Smile. Are you guys? 1, 2, 3. Cheer. What kind of energy is this? There you go. On 3. All right. Ready? Ready? ASCA. Let's see it. On 3, I want everyone to raise their hands and say ASCA. Ready? 1, 2, and 3. Go for it. ASCA. Perfect, guys.